What is up, everyone? We are going to be watching a couple videos, possibly getting down with some remote play. I should actually plug my controller in. I'll plug it in after this first video. Let me make sure stream is looking good and sounding good. Keep now we'll check it.
The first U.S. presidential election in 1789 was very different from the way.
Alright, boys, I think we seem to be good. Seem to be good. Oh shit. We need to turn that down. And how do I pop open my chat? Live chat. There we go. Set that off to the side. We're gonna turn this down just a little bit. This video is pretty loud. Let's go.
Americans do presidential elections today.
Oh, yeah.
In 1789, there were no official candidates. There was no campaigning for the office. There were no political parties, no nominating conventions, no primary elections. The entire election season was very short. And the major issue of this election was the Constitution itself, whether the very system that they were using as the basis for the election, whether they would keep the system. Okay, well, you might be thinking, why were they electing a president for the first time in 1789? Didn't they declare independence in 1776? What were they doing for those 13 years? Well, they didn't have a president during those 13 years. It's important to remember that the United States of America was not originally a single country. It was a collection of 13 separate countries. The 13 colonies that were participating in the rebellion had each been separate from each other, distinct colonies with ties between themselves and Britain, but not really ties amongst themselves between the different colonies. So when the 13 colonies declared their independence, they did so not as a single unified country, but as 13 separate countries.
So maybe that's why there's actually more luck with how we won the war. Can't remember the fucking name of it for some reason right now. Even though you literally just said it. Revolutionary War. There we go. Is because there was 13 different fighting styles, basically. It's like the fucking avatar of pre-modern America. You got the firebenders, the waterbenders, the earthbenders. Some guys with a musket.
Association with each other, what we would today call an international organization, in order to accomplish their common goal of freeing themselves from British rule. There was only one branch of government, effectively, on the federal level, which was the Continental Congress. Although to call it the federal level is a stretch, because there wasn't a federal government, so to speak. Anything that the Continental Congress decided to do had to be enforced by the states. And if a state did not want to enforce it, they didn't have to. Some people at the time saw this as a problem. And they thought that the states would be better off if they entered into a closer union with each other. This was mainly for financial reasons, but I'm not going to get into that. So they held a constitutional convention in Philadelphia in 1787, in which they drafted the Constitution that we use today in the United States. Now, this new constitution was different from the way it had been before. So under the old system, you had one branch of government, the Continental Congress. In this new system, there were three branches of government. There was the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. The legislative branch would consist of Congress, but now Congress would have two separate houses, a House of Representatives, which would represent the people directly, and the Senate, which would represent the states. And then the executive branch would be headed by a president. And then under him would be everyone who is in charge of executing the laws passed by Congress. And then the judicial branch was headed by the Supreme Court, and then there would be various courts underneath the Supreme Court. So one of the questions that the framers of the Constitution had to answer was, how are they going to get the president chosen? Now, one obvious choice would be to have him chosen by Congress. That would essentially make it a parliamentary system. Like in most English-speaking countries, there's a parliamentary system where Parliament decides who the Prime Minister is going to be, and the Prime Minister runs the government. The framers of the Constitution did not want to do that. And by framers, I mean the men who met in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 and drafted the Constitution.
Get banned, but I'm going to do a
They're
dab.
called framers, the framers. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to maintain a strict separation between the executive branch and the legislative branch. So that was off the table. So how else could they elect the president? Well, one option, which is the option I think most Americans today would take for granted, was that the president would be elected directly by the voters. The framers of the Constitution also didn't like that idea. They thought that it would be not practical to do that, and also not wise. So the framers hit upon another system that was neither of those two things. What they would have would be the famous Electoral College, this body of individuals who exist within the executive.
So I'm the only one in here. Do you guys like Fallout? Because I like Fallout. So I think I'm going to watch some Fallout videos after this, like by Rad King or something.
Branch, so you don't have to worry about cross-contamination with the legislative branch. And the Electoral College's only job was every 4 years they would elect the president. Now, how do you choose the members of the Electoral College? Well, they just left that up to the states. However the states wanted to do that. If the state legislature wanted to choose their electors, they could do that. If the state legislature wanted to leave that up to the voters to decide, they could do that too. So the American presidential election has two stages. First, you have to choose the electors.
The only time I've never had
and then
chat
once the electors are chosen, they choose
chat.
the president. That's still the system that's used in the U.S. today.
I always look at it.
And when Americans go to the polls in early November of an election year, they're voting for electors. And then the electors meet, nowadays it's in the middle of December, and they cast their votes for president, and that's the actual election of the president. So what we call Election Day is actually the election of the electors. The Constitution gives Congress the power to decide when each of those elections happens, when the electors are elected and when the president is elected. Nowadays, it's early November and mid-December. In this first election in 1789, the election of electors happened on January 7th, and then the electors would meet and choose the president on February 4th, 1789. So Election Day in 1789 was January 7th. That was what we would call Election Day. Now, some online sources will say that this particular presidential election happened over 2 years, 1788-89.
That's how school should be.
It's not quite true. The election was January 7th, 1789. It was just in 1789. Where that's kind of true is in two states, in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. They actually had a two-stage process for choosing their electors. They would have voters essentially nominate who they would want to have as electors, and then the state legislature would choose from a list that the voters sent up to the legislature. So in both New Hampshire and Massachusetts, the voters went to the polls. Polls isn't the right word. The voters went to their town meetings and voted for who they'd like to be elector. And then those names went to the state legislature.
Usually, just eat
and on January 7th, the state legislature picked from among those that list.
Before stream.
But in the other states that participated in the election, it was just January 7th, 1789.
If I don't get banned, this could be
there were 11 states that participated in the election of 1789.
If I don't get
Rhode Island and North Carolina had rejected the Constitution and therefore were technically not part of the United States and not participating in the election. In 5 of the states, the state legislatures chose the electors. In 4 of the states, the electors were chosen directly by the voters. And then in 2 other states, they had a hybrid system. Now let's take a minute and look at the states.
A little bit off topic, but somehow I've gotten my YouTube Premium back on my main account. I don't understand how. Because I've been flat broke. Flat broke, like negatively broke. But I noticed that my premium was back, so that was nice. I may switch back to that account so we don't have to do with ads. But then I'd have to like check in on my account from one account to another account. I have a lot more subscriptions on there too. It's been like one of my primary channels for like at least 5 years.
Direct elections because they did it differently in the different states. In Pennsylvania and Delaware, they had statewide elections, meaning in Pennsylvania, wherever you were in the state, if you were voting in the election, you voted for 10 names. And then the top 10 vote getters statewide would become elector. Delaware did the same thing, but they had 3 electors. So wherever you were statewide, you voted for 3 names. In Maryland, it was also statewide. Everybody wrote down 8 names because Maryland got 8 electors. But Maryland had a rule where 5 of the names had to come from the Western Shore and 3 of the names from the Eastern Shore. Virginia did it a little bit differently because the Virginia legislature actually created electoral districts. Virginia got 12 electoral votes, and so the legislature divided the state up into 12 electoral districts. Each one would elect 1 elector. And these were distinct from the 10 congressional districts that Virginia had. Virginia was the only state to do it this way. So looking at the different states and the way they did it, that reflects the politics of the different states. So Pennsylvania, for example, the Pennsylvania legislature was dominated by Federalists, meaning people who were pro-Constitution. Support for the Constitution tended to be stronger in the cities. So they thought by making it a statewide ballot, it would make it more likely for Federalists to be elected as elector. The Virginia legislature was dominated by anti-Federalists, people who were opposed to the new Constitution. And they wanted to improve the rural vote, and so they drew districts to make it more likely that rural people would be elected as electors, and rural people were more likely to be opposed to the Constitution. And this touches on the big issue of the presidential election that year, which was the Constitution itself, whether the Constitution was even a good idea. It was extremely controversial in a way that I think most Americans today probably don't really realize. But there were a lot of people who were opposed to the Constitution at the time, and the passage of the Constitution was quite controversial in several states. Some Americans felt like the Constitution was a betrayal of the goals of the Revolutionary War. They felt like they had traded one tyranny for another. They'd gotten rid of the tyranny of the British Parliament and the British monarchy, and they had now were instituting a new tyranny of a new federal system. A lot of Americans, especially in rural areas and out in the western areas, were afraid that this new federal system would be opposed to their own interests, that the federal government would be dominated by commercial interests from the port cities, and would make policy decisions that would financially benefit the big port cities and disadvantage rural areas. In fact, this controversy between those who favor the Constitution and those who are opposed to it ended up making it so that New York could not participate in the presidential election at all, because the New York legislature was divided. The upper house, the Senate, was majority Federalist. The lower house, the Assembly, was majority anti-Federalist. So the Senate, which was 10-8 in favor of the Constitution, wanted each house of the legislature to choose 4 of New York's 8 electors. The Senate would choose 4, and the Assembly would choose 4. And that way, 4 of New York's 8 electors would be pro-Constitution. The Anti-Federalists wanted the legislature to decide on the electors as a whole. So each member of the legislature would get 1 vote. They would have 1 slate of 8. Essentially, they would choose them in a joint session of the 2 houses. What that would mean practically is that all 8 of New York's electors would be anti-Constitution. So the Assembly would pass a bill saying this is how we're going to choose our electors. It would go to the Senate. The Senate would say, no, we're not going to do it that way. They would pass their own bill that would go back to the Assembly, and the Assembly would turn it down. It went to conference committee. They argued over it, couldn't come to a resolution. This went on for weeks. Then January 7th came, and they were deadlocked. So midnight, January 7th, they still hadn't chosen their electors. That was it. So they did not have electors. The same gridlock meant that New York had no senators because it was up to the state legislature to choose senators. So it took them until, I think, the summer of 1789 to finally decide who their senators were going to be. A similar thing actually happened in New Hampshire, because New Hampshire's legislature was also divided in a similar way. But in that case, the anti-federalists in the lower house of the New Hampshire legislature gave in and agreed to the Senate's terms. So New Hampshire did, and it was very close to midnight when they made that compromise. So New Hampshire did end up participating in the election.
I'd like to thank our sponsor, Liberty Mutual. They customize your car insurance so you only pay for what you need. Contestants ready?
No, wrong button. There we go. That's what you get for playing unskippable ads. Oh my god, 2 unskippable ads at the same time. What is my RNG luck?
Now, this business of whether an elector was pro-Constitution or anti-Constitution, what was that about? The Constitution ended up getting approved in these 11 states, but there were a lot of people who were uncomfortable with it, and so what they hoped they could do was get a second convention. That's what they wanted to have. They wanted to get a second constitutional convention that would draft a different constitution that would be more acceptable to the anti-federalists. Barring that, they could, at the very least, get elected to positions within the federal government and then undermine the federal system from within, and thereby prevent the full weight of the federal government from coming into force, perhaps make people disillusioned with the federal system and provoke them to agree to a new constitutional convention. Another thing was, if you get anti-federalists elected to Congress, at the very least, they could be clamoring to get amendments. Now, when the Constitution was approved in the various states,
I didn't even know that thing was
the pro-Constitution people promised, which seems a little bit shady in retrospect, honestly, but they said, oh, go ahead and approve the Constitution now. We promise we'll adopt amendments later. So people were voting for the Constitution with the promise in the future, it wasn't really binding, but with this understanding that in the future amendments will be adopted, which ended up happening. You know, that was the Bill of Rights, which came into effect in 1791. But that was the idea of electing anti-Constitution electors. They were hoping that if you get enough anti-federalists as electors, then they could cause problems for the presidential election. Everybody knew that Washington was going to become president. They knew that actually back in 1787 when they were drafting the Constitution. George Washington was one of the Virginia's delegates, and he was actually sitting there in the room while they're all talking about the president, and it was kind of an open secret that they're creating this office, and George Washington's going to be the guy they're going to put in that office first. So the Federalists were afraid that anti-Federalist electors might mess up the election. And how would they do that? The framers of the Constitution created this system where the electors would vote for 2 people for president rather than 1 person. And then the person who got the most votes would become president, and the person who got the second most votes would be vice president. And the weakness of this system became apparent immediately, because the way it's supposed to work is George Washington will get the most votes, and then John Adams will get the second most votes. Then you get president, vice president. Great. But what if George Washington does not get the most votes? What if he gets the second most votes? What if some anti-federalist electors decide not to vote for George Washington? Maybe they vote for Adams and then some other candidate, just some throwaway name. They could potentially throw the election to Adams, making John Adams the first president and George Washington the vice president. Now, the problem with that is Adams was not as popular as Washington, especially in the South. And so that could reduce the goodwill that the general public had for the federal government, right? And so that would help to undermine the federal government and therefore achieve the ends that the anti-Constitution people had. That was something that the Federalists were afraid could happen. Or alternatively, another possibility would be if there were enough anti-Federalist electors they could get George Washington elected president and then an anti-federalist elected vice president. Now, among the anti-federalists, there were a few names, but I think the most common name that was bandied about at the time was George Clinton. If you were an anti-federalist elector, it was expected that you would end up voting for Clinton, maybe Washington Clinton or maybe Adams Clinton. You could do that. So just to give you an example of a possible thing that could play out, the Federalist electors could vote for Washington and Adams, and then the anti-Federalist electors could vote for Adams and Clinton. And so then Adams ends up getting the most votes. Washington comes in second, Clinton comes in third. That makes Adams the president, Washington the vice president. Just as one example of many possible permutations of this.
I'm really curious now. Wait, what was that guy's name? We were at 1628.
George Clinton. If you were
George Clinton. Okay. I was just curious. How that would have been weird.
a Federalist elector, it was expected that you would end up voting for Clinton, maybe Washington Clinton or maybe Adams Clinton. You could do that. So just to give you an example of a possible thing that could play out, the Federalist electors could vote for Washington and Adams, and then the anti-Federalist electors could vote for Adams and Clinton. And so then Adams ends up getting the most votes. Washington comes in second, Clinton comes in third. That makes Adams the president, Washington the vice president. Just as one example of many possible permutations of this. So the point is, the system that was written into the Constitution was a bad system. Having the electors vote for two names and not designate which one they wanted to be president, which one they wanted to be vice president, was a flaw. And people at the time recognized that as a flaw. So remember, there are two stages of electing the president. First, you get the electors, and then the electors choose the president. So the electors were going to meet and choose the president on February 4th. In the run-up to that electoral college vote, some political figures in the country were trying to organize a system where they would make sure that Adams didn't get as many votes as Washington. And the most prominent figure in this movement was Alexander Hamilton. He was writing a ton of letters to different people. He was not the only one involved with this. There were a few others also who were writing letters to different states, writing to the different electors, saying, make sure you don't vote Washington Adams. Make sure there are some guys, there who are going to vote for somebody besides Adams. So if you look at the results of the 1789 election, you look at the Electoral College votes, it looks like, everybody voted for Washington, and then a bunch of people voted for Adams, and then there were a bunch of small vote totals for other people. A lot of those votes were deliberate throwaway votes, where they would have voted for Adams, but deliberately chose not to vote for Adams because they were trying to mitigate against a potential anti-federalist scheme. In Connecticut, they had 7 electors. 5 of them voted for Washington and Adams. 2 of them voted for Washington and Huntington. The votes for Huntington were going to go to Adams. They voted for Huntington as part of the scheme that Hamilton was organizing.
I should update my
In Pennsylvania,
stream on my phone.
Again, those 2 that voted for Hancock would have voted for Adams. In Maryland, there were 8 electoral votes. 2 of the electors could not actually make it to the election. The Electoral College meets on a state-by-state basis, so the electors in each state come together. In Maryland, the 8 electors were supposed to meet in Annapolis to do their voting. 2 of the electors couldn't make it. One of them was sick. He had gout and therefore couldn't travel. The other one was unable to because of ice that blocked. I think he had to cross either the Chesapeake Bay or a river, and it was filled with ice, and so he wasn't able to make it to Annapolis. Only 6 electors in Maryland participated. All 6 of them voted Washington and Harrison. Harrison was Chief Justice of the Maryland General Court. He was not a national figure. They voted for him purely as part of Hamilton's scheme to make sure that Washington came in first and Adams came in second. They would have voted for Adams otherwise. Now, not all of these votes were like that. In some of the states, the electors really were voting for someone besides Adams because they didn't want Adams. They wanted somebody else instead. I think the votes for John Jay were like that. I think the votes for John Jay were legitimately for John Jay. I mean, I did a lot of reading about this, but I couldn't figure out exactly for every single state what the motivations were of the electors. But if I were to guess, and this is based on incomplete research of the election, I think the election would have looked more like this if there hadn't been so much strategic voting. Now, this setup of the way the electors would vote for president, voting for two names and not distinguishing which one you wanted to be president and which one vice president, this continued to be a problem in every presidential election after this until they fixed it. And they finally fixed it in the 12th Amendment, where they said that electors will say which one they're voting for president and which one they're voting for vice president. The election results really hurt John Adams. I mean, he didn't have any expectation of being elected president. He, like everyone else, expected Washington to get the most electoral votes, but he didn't expect to get as few electoral votes as he got. And he felt kind of devastated by that.
Off stream.
It's kind of sad because it didn't have to happen that way. They didn't have to worry that the Anti-Federalists would pull off a scheme, because they didn't. All the fears about Anti-Federalist shenanigans came to nothing. Washington easily got all 69 electoral votes, and Adams wasn't going to get more than him. There were enough people voting for Hancock and John Jay and Rutledge to prevent Adams from tying with Washington. So it's kind of sad how that worked out. But anyway, those are the election results. George Washington was elected president. John Adams was elected vice president. They both traveled to New York, which was the first seat of the federal government, and were sworn in the spring of 1789 to begin their first terms, respectively. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this election. If you're an American, do you think it'd be better or worse to have our elections the way they were back in 1789?
We'll comment. We'll give him some. We'll just give him a yes. I'll be like, what? I don't remember what the question was. Yes. Alright, we gotta edit this video. We need to get that tag clickbait when people are looking up. Oh, get out of here. I don't think it's gonna dox me in any way. Oh my gosh. Grow your team, what? No, that's not what I want to do at all. Get out of here. How dare you? How dare you? Alright, what would people be looking up? Well, Moist Critical did a interview with CoffeeZilla, so we'll do that. We'll just look up coffee, or not look up, but tag. And then penguins. Nope. You son of a bitch. Remote play. Probably play Dark Souls. We're gonna watch a Rad King video. Get out of here. Yeah. I don't know, let's do that, just throw it in there. Oh. Alright. Allow all comments. Sort by and newest. There we go. And now we just... Look at all these people baiting it. I like my clickbait. Very shock, much wow. Alright, I need to go back into my channel and pull up my live chat. Oh. There we go. Now, we wanted to watch Rad King. Holy shit. I should have tagged livestream fails. Rad King. What was that video? Where? Oh, I have it up on my TV. The power. That should be enough.
I have a challenge for all of you. Go to every computer in your house, your mom's, your dad's, your sister, your brother's computer, and install Honey. Wait, Mom, before you...
Do exactly the opposite of that. Go to every computer in your house and uninstall every file. So we might need turned up.
Welcome. Please gather round, Adam's Blessed, to this week's short lesson on what, in Adam's name, is going on with electricity in the world of Fallout. Have you ever gone into an old decrepit building, read some terminals, reprogrammed some defense turrets, snagged a fusion core, and while you're riding up the elevator to the top floor of a destroyed building, thought to yourself, what the hell is powering this thing? How are you able to do almost
I think I'm gonna do a
the
dab
pre-war
in
people
between,
could 200 years after the world was nuked and
every
left to
new
rot?
video, every
I
new
sure
thing.
have,
So
and
we'll
as
do
a
another
result,
dab.
I combed through the games and online resources to get to the bottom of this question. I found some
At least
answers,
until I'm, like,
some more
obliterated.
questions, and a nice pile of conjecture as well.
Hey,
Let's
Cold Blood
first
can
consider
drink on
several
stream. I
ways
should
that
be allowed
both
to
small
smoke on
and
stream.
large settlements in Fallout could source and use their power.
Smoking
The first
legal
option
in,
is
like,
that they
half
just
of the
don't have
United
any.
States.
It is the post-apocalypse after all, and not having any sort of electricity would probably be very common. Alternatively, settlements could be powered, or at least partially powered, using energy storage, whether that be a fission battery, fusion cells, or some other source. These can maybe be taken
much
somewhere and
drinking, still
charged,
illegal
or
in some
swapped out
places.
when they are dead during the normal course of trading. Power like this would likely be for personal use and wouldn't be able to power anything very large. It is also possible for settlements to have their own power generation devices.
Don't we already
Windmills,
kind of know this?
solar
Doesn't
cells,
it come from fusion
combustion
cores
generators,
and
or
stuff like
what
that?
have you, can provide power to an entire settlement, or at least several homes. This setup could also be augmented by people using energy storage devices for small personal things. Lastly, we have a situation where a settlement draws all or most power from existing pre-war power networks, in addition to maybe making their own power or using some sort of battery.
Oh, no
So let's take a
fucking
look at
way.
all the Fallout games and
Bro, I could remote play. I hope I could stream remote play, because I don't think you can actually download Fallout New Vegas anymore on PS Now. But I'm pretty sure you have to stream it. So if I can stream remote play that, I could play New Vegas for a stream.
if some of their
That
communities
would be
fall
dope.
into
That'd be
these
fun.
categories. Completely unpowered settlements of note would include Shady Sands in the first Fallout
Mind you, I'm
and
not gonna be
Arroyo
good
in
at it,
Fallout 2.
but
In fact,
I'll be
most
okay
good
at it.
examples of completely unpowered settlements seem to be from the first two Fallouts. Nothing in either settlement hints towards them using electricity, and there doesn't appear to be any electrically powered equipment or anything that would need to be charged. Likewise, the Great Khan Camp in Red Rock Canyon is similarly powerless in New Vegas, as is the settlement Oasis in Fallout 3. Small settlements, usually in dark places like subways or caves, can be mostly powerless, with some lights being powered by batteries, although these are typically very small communities. Junktown may be a larger example of this, since there is no indication of anything else being
God damn.
powered except for a neon
Up on
sign in
camera.
Gizmo's place. I don't count slot machines as necessarily being electrically powered, since they could conceivably be fully mechanical. There's no generator seen in Junktown, and if all you needed power for was a neon sign, a generator might be kind of overkill. For communities with their own power source, vaults are a great example, whether they still have their original occupants or new ones entirely. Likewise, settlements like Rivet City uses an old nuclear reactor from the aircraft carrier. The boomers at Nellis Air Force Base use a combination of solar and biodiesel, and Diamond City is powered by power noodles, and I mean that in every way. People power their bodies with noodles, and the stand itself is built around a large generator with power lines running to all the other buildings. It seems that once communities reach a sufficient size, then they can put together the resources to build their own reactor, or fix up an old one. Lastly are the settlements that are powered by pre-war power networks, the best example of which is probably the Strip, who gets its power from Hoover Dam, like it did before the war. There is a big gray zone, however, with Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 in particular, where some settlements get their power from a source that cannot be identified visually. No generators or batteries, and therefore the possibility of tapping into pre-war systems seems to be the only option. Now I know what many of you may be thinking. How could power stations still be working after so much time has passed? If the power plants look anything like the rest of the buildings in Fallout 3 and 4, I'm sure they're ready to cave in at any moment. Well, let's save that for a little later, and just all pretend like having power plants work for 200 years without human intervention is just a normal thing, okay? Fallout 3 sets a precedent that up until its release was not ever explicitly stated, implied, or really even thought of. A terminal entry from a ghoul scientist in Fallout 3 mentions that she was able to tap into the underground power lines that were live. This is not a one-off thing either, as she states that if you know where to look, they are buried all over the wasteland. So there is power to be had from the old power networks, and that power is enough, at least in this case, to power a satellite array. The infamous subways have all sorts of lights and signs still lit up after all this time, showing that this power is coming from somewhere, and is most likely the old network. No large generators are found in the subways, similar to what we can see in the vaults, and smaller generators that Wastelanders sometimes use are also absent in the subways, except for where Wastelanders have made impromptu living spaces. These are the generators that can be found in Fallout 3, and in the game files are labeled clearly as generators. These things, however, are also found all over the place, but are not called generators. Rather, they are called Electrical Box 01. What are these? That is a good question, and their presence in the capital wasteland is the best evidence we have for a vast pre-war network that is mostly, but not always, underground and still live. So after getting an electrical engineering degree from the University of Wikipedia, I experimented a bit with these electrical boxes in the classic Fallout 3 style. And by that, I mean I just started shooting them. It was a remarkably effective investigation.
She needs a dog treat. Jinx, you want a dog treat? Let's go. You want to eat? Eat the dog treat. Eat the dog treat. You want to eat a dog treat? Is she a dog treat eater? She's just a little dog treater. Well, I got no treats for you, but I got a little bit of food. I have returned. Once again.
Technique, and I highly recommend it. What I found is that these electrical boxes blow up quite nicely, start on fire,
cold.
spark, and show us something interesting. 3 large coils of wire are exposed, which, from my highly qualified and fresh education, is indicative that these are transformers. These wouldn't be found in a generator, so that is off the table. Although the super mutant behemoth trapped behind an electrified fence makes you think that these electrical boxes are generators, since destroying it kills the electricity. This is important because look on the sides and look where these pipes go. They go into the ground. They are fed power from the old underground network and then send the transformed power into other underground power lines. Very much like the ground transformers that are found all over neighborhoods, often in those very large green cases. Look at a place like Evergreen Mills, and you will see several of these all outside the facility, and upon going inside, we find several powered objects, including terminals, signs, and lights, with no other obvious power source. So where are these power sources then? Well, in Fallout 3, we are not aware of any power plants in the base game. Yes, there are substations, but those aren't generating power. We don't know of any real power plants until Broken Steel added the Only Power Works, a power plant that presumably always existed and was just blocked by ruins and debris until the events of Broken Steel takes place. We don't know how this power plant generates power, but given the very long time between the Great War and Fallout 3, assuming it is nuclear powered is reasonable. This example of a previously unknown power plant becoming accessible is probably not a one-off. An area such as Washington, D.C. very likely had fortified, possibly even buried power plants to help ensure that any kind of attack would have difficulty knocking out the region's power. It is important to acknowledge as well that the infrastructure was massively damaged in Fallout 3, and with it, the power network. There are many buildings that don't have a single functioning light, and some buildings even show partial functionality. The Statesman Hotel that Riley's Rangers get stuck on have some lights that work inside the building. However, the elevator, which is their key to escaping, does not work, and the player needs to get a fission battery to allow it to operate, which could indicate that even parts that may have power may not be getting enough electricity for power-intensive machinery to operate. Fallout 4 has some similarities to Fallout 3, namely in that there are many areas with no obvious power sources. The Commonwealth, however, was quite different in its power networks, as it appears that a lot of effort went into decentralizing the power grid. Mass Fusion was the largest power supplier in the Commonwealth, and there is a lot to be said about this company that I'll have to save for another video. Suffice it to say that the company was known in the pre-war for generating power not through fusion, but through conventional fission methods, through the so-called plutonium wells and small junction boxes that were installed in people's homes. The plutonium wells appear to be isolated solely to Concord and are seen attached to buildings with wires running off of them to power the entire town. How they work is not exactly known. However, Mass Fusion insisted to the public that all these technologies were fusion power and not fission based, even though the name of some of their technology, like the plutonium well, literally has the word plutonium in it. Pre-war corporate America was taking advantage of the awful education standards, since apparently no one knows the difference between fusion and fission anymore. This fission technology worked, although it made people sick from all the radiation given off, and caused Mass Fusion to perpetrate crimes against the environment as they secretly dumped all the radioactive waste wherever they could hide it. We don't know what these distribution boxes look like, but it seems as though they had the ability to power individual homes, since they are referred to as being in or on people's homes. In addition to these decentralized forms of power, Mass Fusion provided conventional centralized power that fed substations throughout the Commonwealth. This was presumably done using fission power again, because it wasn't until the moments leading up to the Great War that their fusion project was successfully running. It is also worth mentioning that Poseidon Energy also had power plants running in the area, and there are remnants of a nuclear plant that can be found in the glow, where it was destroyed in the large nuclear blast seen in the game's tutorial level. Could these power plants be operational enough that they are providing some power to much of the Commonwealth? That's certainly possible. are the plutonium wells still functioning and providing power? This is hard to say, but there are areas of Concord that show the use of lights, so it seems that it is certainly possible. Are the household distribution boxes still working and providing power to individual buildings? Again, hard to say, but it is certainly possible. Fallout 4 has a lot more power infrastructure that is above ground than Fallout 3, with some massive power lines and towers that can be seen in some places. The clearest indication that these various plants are still providing at least some power can be seen when examining some of the power lines. Sparks can be seen jumping from the end of broken power lines or truncated pylons, indicating that, yes, these power plants are still working, at least somewhat. So why do settlements go through all the trouble of building or fixing generators when they can just tap into some sweet free electron juice that, by all indications, seems limitless?
You wanna take a bath?
Well, I think there are
Come
some
on.
hints, mainly from larger settlements,
bath.
that would have higher power draw and therefore greater demand. Let's take Diamond City as an example, which has a large central power plant smack dab in the middle. Maybe it provides power because the existing pre-war systems are unreliable. I think that's pretty reasonable, but I actually think something else is more likely. Going back to the example of the Statesman Hotel in Fallout 3, where the elevator is not working while several lights in the hotel do work. This could indicate that the existing system simply cannot provide sufficient power for power-hungry machinery. We know water purification happens in the Commonwealth, which is an energy-intensive process even in our world. And it is very possible that the existing power is insufficient to power heavier machinery, or really anything more demanding than lights, terminals, and small radios that are very commonly found. If you want a real-world example of this, splice your dryer to plug into a 120-volt outlet and see if it works. Just kidding. Please don't do this. You have power, but not enough to make it work as it should. Also, sorry to all the viewers outside the States who just use 220 volts for everything. Just ask your American friend to try this experiment out for you. So in order to run the machinery needed for these larger settlements, be they defenses, water purifiers, or what have you, these settlements cannot rely on pre-war power plants for all their electrical needs. These kinds of settlements that can easily tap into existing power lines, but instead opt for their own generators, are the greatest evidence that, yes, the pre-war power is there, but there are big limitations. So on the topic of power, it's time to talk about something I have wanted to touch on for a while now, and this is the perfect place to do so. Love 'em or hate 'em, fusion cores look like they are here to stay in the Fallout universe, and these paradoxical little dudes are again brought to you by mass fusion. It seems ironic that a company that could not get their own fusion reactors going until just before the war somehow created handheld fusion technology. That is, unless they aren't actually fusion based. Nowhere is it stated in-game that they are definitely running on fusion or fission, except for the name Fusion Core, which the company Mass Fusion couldn't even get fusion going, so a name doesn't mean much. Instead, if we see how they react when you max out the nuclear physicist perk, the argument for them being fission increases. At max nuclear physicist rank, when you are in power armor and deplete a fusion core by doing just power armor things, the core will be ejected from the armor and detonate exactly like a mini nuke. Although we don't know what kind of tech would go into miniaturized fusion, because we can't even do that with these giant laser facilities in real life, depleting the deuterium and tritium fuel that a fusion system would use would seem to remove the volatile elements from the fusion core. So what would make it detonate with the force of a mini nuke? That is, unless it is not fusion, and rather another lie concocted by Big Fusion to line their pockets. The fusion core controversy is just starting, however, because these fusion cores can be found in many buildings and in the capital wasteland, usually in the basements of buildings where they can be found in a large, yellow, mechanical device. This worrying device is labeled as a fusion generator if you build one in your settlement, and houses a fusion core that can be looted when found out in the wild. This has stirred a lot of controversy, as they appear to have powered the buildings that they can be found in for over 200 years. And yet, when you pluck them out and throw them in your power armor, you can barely get several in-game hours out of them. So what gives? Much ado has been written about this dilemma, with videos calculating whether they could possibly have power for over 200 years. and justifications that revolve around how power-intensive power armor is when compared to a building, and would therefore deplete the cores much faster. Well, what if I told you that there is an alternate and honestly simpler answer? It wouldn't even necessarily negate all the other theories that have been bandied about, but I haven't heard it discussed nearly enough, and it uses in-game mechanics as justification. When you find a fusion generator, take a look at it. We have lights, in fact a green light under start, and another for core cycle, so it's definitely drawing power from the core. Boom, case closed. Rad King, you're an idiot. I am most definitely an idiot, but if you compare a settlement generator that is producing electricity and the ones you find out in the Commonwealth, they are identical, except that the fusion core is fully seated and inserted for the ones in the settlement that we know are generating power. The ones in the wild protrude a bit and don't appear to be seated. So what? That's it? That is my great evidence? Not entirely. You see, if you take a fusion core out of a generator, the light on the generator flickers, and the whirring sound dies away as the only visible moving piece stops. But that's not the important part. The important part is that the building does not lose power. Not only does it not lose power, everything works in it as it did before. Lights, terminals, elevators, defenses, elevators, I think I said elevators twice, it all works. If this really was the only thing powering the building, then that stuff just shouldn't work. If it was partially powering the building, then some things should stop working and other things should keep working. But no, it all works. We can still believe that, theoretically, the fusion cores would still have energy in them after all this time, according to that Shoddycast video, and we can also maintain the belief that power armor is particularly energy intensive to operate, and therefore drains cores faster than, I don't know, keeping a nuka fridge running for 200 years. I just seriously doubt at this point that those fusion cores are generating power for the buildings that they're in this entire time. So, there is a look at Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 exclusively because of the rather mysterious power sources that seem to still be active in the wasteland 200 years after Adam baptized the earth in fire.
I don't think
there are some important things to consider and discuss, though, about electricity in post-war America.
Going out
is it unreasonable for fans to assume that many of these power plants have been automated to the point that they can continue running and generating power after most humans are dead? In a world of AI, giant robots of destruction, tiny robots of destruction, and sometimes, but mostly not, fusion technology, is it out of the realm of possibility that the power plants have been hardened and automated in such a way that they can operate well after the war, given that they haven't been directly destroyed? In the world of Fallout, not only is it one of the smallest things that would worry me, I would almost kind of expect it. It has been justified several times in online discussion that the existence of power from the pre-war networks could be chalked up to room temperature superconductors that perfectly preserve a charge. Which, yeah, that sounds like something that would happen in Fallout, but it's not a nice simple explanation. If you like it and want to run with it, please, by all means. However, I tend to gravitate towards simpler explanations that don't require the existence of people, places, or materials that have never appeared in the universe before. Others have justified the presence of usable electricity by saying that with the massive destruction, there are fewer people and therefore fewer appliances and machines that would be drawing on that power. So, the massively reduced population that survived the war would be able to make use of pre-war power, even if its capacity was reduced drastically. This is certainly plausible. However, there are some complications. It is very obvious that the infrastructure itself sustained substantial damage based on how entire areas don't have power, or by seeing the damage firsthand. This damage would have caused shorts that would cause problems for the power plants, tripping substations and burning fuses that may or may not reasonably be repaired. This would cause great loss on the entire system and additional strain on the power plants. So it's not as simple as fewer people use less energy. A lot of that energy would go straight into the ground and be lost. Additionally, like we see in Fallout 4 with the severed power lines, in all probability the pre-war world was using three-phase electricity like we do in real life. Having some power lines break has the possibility of knocking out one of these phases, which would cause problems. And I know my prestigious education taught me that this is a simplification of a very complicated topic, since it would depend on what lines broke at what point in the system and so on. But to add more credence to my theory as to why settlements need their own generators and can't simply rely on the existing power to run heavy machinery, if most places only have access to 1 or 2 phase electricity, this would not be that much of an issue for rather simple objects like bulbs or simple electronics, but it would present a big problem for large electric motors, like something we would find on a water pump. In very simplified terms, 3-phase allows induction motors to start rotating on their own, whereas those same motors on 2 or 1 phase would need something to jumpstart them. If all this pre-war machinery was built to run on 3-phase, it will struggle or outright not work if the incoming power from the pre-war power network has been damaged and is only capable of providing 1 or 2 phases to end users. My last point is actually not about electricity or power itself, although I'm sure you are all completely psyched out of your minds after talking about phases of electricity. I'll give you a moment to calm down.
Oh, okay.
That's not what we wanted, right?
We switched to Liberty Mutual and saved
least this one's
$652.
Okay, good. As I was saying, a good amount of criticism is levied at Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 in particular when looking at the subject of power and why everything still seems to run just fine. The implicit explanation is that they draw power from existing systems, and the explicit arguments in this video help prove that. Although I tend to agree that explicit is better than implicit, fans already do a lot of implicit
YouTube does some
justification without even realizing
cuts
it.
for ads.
Using power as the example, since
I don't know
that's
if
what
he
this
set
whole
it up
video is
like that
about,
or if YouTube
if we look
automatically
at the
generated
original
it there.
games, we see that a lot of places did have their own generators. Bravo! That is great explicit evidence, like what can be found at the West Tech facility to get the elevators working, or the oil rig, whose power systems are damaged in order to cause the rig to explode. However, go to the Brotherhood bunker in the first Fallout and just try and find the generator that is powering all that crap. Seriously, their power bill would suck, especially right now, right, Europe? Anyway, other places like Vault 15 don't show or talk about generators, and even the Mariposa military base does not have power generators. Are we to take this literally to mean that these places hold a Nikolai Tesla and are powering things from the Earth? No, because it is reasonable that there is a generator tucked away somewhere, but it isn't particularly important that it be right there and visible for us, the players. In fact, in the case of Vault 15 and the Mariposa military base, we do finally get to see their generators when it does become pertinent in Fallout 2, since the player can use them to their advantage. They were included when it did become useful for the players to see and use them. Otherwise, the unspoken implication was that, yeah, they were likely there somewhere, we just couldn't find them. That same logic should be afforded the later games, rather than being used as a mark against them, because we don't see the exact generators that are being used to power every building. This doesn't appear to be a developer thing either, since, and please, if I'm wrong, someone correct me, but I could not find anything online or in-game in Old World Blues. The whole of the Big MT is powered by some unknown source, and they are using a metric butt-ton of power. Couple this with how maps are for the older games, where they encompass entire regions of the United States, with areas that used to have a lot of people, and contrast that with the later games that focus mostly on one city and the outlying areas. It's reasonable to not expect the Gecko power plant, for example, to be able to power the She down in San Francisco, but it's entirely plausible for plants around DC to power areas across the town. I guess what I'm saying with this last bit is that I can empathize with those that want explanations and answers, but we need to be consistent with how we afford games and developers leeway with explicitly or implicitly giving us in-world information. And now I leave you, hopefully knowing more about real-life electricity, fake-life electrical systems, and, well, I am a little biased, but also some pretty convincing fan theories of how electricity works in Fallout. Hold to Adam's word. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next week.
That was Rad King. Go ahead and check out some more of his videos. Oh, I actually watched this last night, like off stream. I don't know why. It was an hour and 4 minutes long. Didn't the bombs go off though, like technically before the Cold War? No, I guess it would have been like mid-height Cold War, but there's also...
I have a challenge for all of you. Go to every computer in your house, your mom's, your dad's, your sister, your brother's computer, and
a split in the timeline that was like before that, because we would have had, they would have had like stronger radioactive batteries in a sense. Portable fusion. But
hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome to this week's short sermon.
Portable fusion.
We've all experienced letdowns across all video games and franchises. Whether they are little ones that is really nothing more than a passing thought or annoyance, or big ones that shape the way that we view an entire game, if you have any expectations going into a video game, you will experience at least some letdowns. Although I love Fallout dearly, I have had my own fair share of letdowns, and here I am going to talk about one of my more frivolous ones. But damn, if it didn't sting in the moment and leave me with a bitter taste in my mouth. So what could have possibly gotten my rad undies in such a twist that I felt the need to make an entire video about it? It's the Syringer in Fallout 4. Okay. Before you click away, pause, or comment below, let me explain. Although I didn't know this during my first playthrough of Fallout 4, all the way back in 2015,
Actually, I don't remember if the Syringer is trash in Fallout 4 or if it's trash in 76. I know it's trash in 76. I don't remember if it's trash in both.
Syringer would become symbolic of how I would feel about many aspects of Fallout 4. It was, in a way, a microcosm of the game. It was also the very first memorable disappointment. So, let's talk about why the Fallout 4 Syringer sucks, why it was such a big deal to me, and how the Syringer can be associated with many failings in Fallout 4.
Bro, the Syringer could have been so cool. Like, you could have used it with, like, poisons or something that are, like, actually effective. Not just to, like, read the minds of animals.
Come to refer to as Syringer Syndrome. So, in case you don't know what the Syringer is, or maybe you do, but you don't know much about it, the Fallout 4 loading screen that features it sums things up nicely. It calls the Syringer a rare and custom-made weapon that can shoot modified syringes at an enemy, who then suffer from the effects of whatever is in the syringe. That is pretty straightforward, although I have to call BS on the rare part, since it can be found 13 different ways, either just at a location, bought from certain vendors, or at the end of marked and unmarked quests. This isn't a deep dive into the weapon. I will save that for one of my breakdown videos, but it's worth mentioning a few things. Rather disappointingly, there are not many in-game mods for the weapon, which stands in contrast to the emphasis that Fallout 4 put on weapon modification. But the Syringer's real secret sauce isn't in the mods, it's in the number of syringes and their myriad of effects. The Berserk syringe will frenzy a target, leading them to attack anyone around them. The Bleed Out syringe will do bleeding damage. Endanger All syringe reduces a target's damage. Lock Joint syringe will paralyze a target. Mind Cloud syringe will cause targets to be unable to spot you. The Pax syringe pacifies targets. The Rad Scorpion Venom syringe does poison damage. The Yellow Belly syringe will make a target flee. And lastly, the Bloatfly syringe will cause a bloat.
Actually, one of my first videos I ever made was where to find the XO1 armor in Fallout 4. It was like in Diamond City or some shit. I don't remember. But I like just got a PS4 and was recording and had like my headset on for audio. It was so bad. It was actually like not super bad, but there was no editing at all. It was like
to spawn upon the death of the enemy. There are some pretty interesting effects in there. Causing paralysis, causing a frenzy, and what's that about a bloatfly? It bursts out of an enemy upon their death like some sort of xenomorph. Man, some of these sound like they could be pretty fun to mess around with. One of my favorite things in any game, not just Fallout, is to have an intriguing, novel, and open-ended mechanic. This can be done in many forms, and I have a number of examples throughout my years of playing games. the self-guided missile from 007 Nightfire, the general powers in Command & Conquer Generals, the chainsaw bayonets in Gears of War, the Nemesis system in Shadow of Mordor, and to bring it back to Fallout, the Mesmetron in Fallout 3. I wasted so much time sneaking around, seeing who I could enslave and who I couldn't. Watching NPCs aggro, save scumming, having their heads explode, and slowly walking away like I had no idea what just happened. It was great fun, good memories, and something that really satisfied my natural curiosity and compulsion to test the limits. These novel, open-ended mechanics stick with me and help color my perception of games, even if they are just ancillary and not a main component of the game. So on my first playthrough of Fallout 4, all those years ago now, when I saw the syringer, I just knew that I had to take that baby out for a spin. I immediately started to justify a whole story and build around it. Maybe Nate had an education as a chemist, and this was his way of releasing his inner mad scientist. Perhaps he was a medic in the army who took a vow to do no harm and therefore sticks to using non-lethal methods of overcoming enemies. Ooh, what if on one of my future playthroughs, I could do a full pacifist run? And so my mind was off to the races, thinking of all the possibilities with this old and not so shiny toy. So the first thing I had to do was get some ammo for it. I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised to find out that all the ammo for the weapon has to be crafted. Being so early on in the game, I didn't have the resources to make much of any of the ammo types. So I loaded up on what I could and went forth, eager to test the weapon and scavenge for materials to make more ammo. With only 2 types of ammo, the pack syringe and bleed out syringe, I came upon some super mutants and decided to try and pacify them, while I ran in and looted some beautiful, beautiful junk. Well, since the stock sights on the weapon aren't great, I ended up missing a few times, and when I eventually hit one of the mutants, he did indeed get pacified. I quickly ran in, knowing I only had 30 seconds, but found another super mutant, and had no more packed syringes to pacify him. At risk of being killed, I loaded the bleeding syringe and shot the mutant, to watch his health bar barely move. I shot again after the fairly slow reload, and again, he still had most of his health. It was at this moment I realized I wasn't going to survive unless I used real weapons. And finally, I was able to kill all the super mutants. Okay, so that was kind of a failure, but I loaded up on all sorts of junk and went back to make more ammo and build what weapon mods I could, starting with sights. Using all my resources, I struck out again with a similar goal in mind. Use the syringer, get junk to craft more syringes, and profit. The only thing was, I had to keep falling back on my normal weapons. Useful effects either had a low duration or an
I feel like this guy definitely scripts his videos. Well, I don't script anything, but I wonder what that looked like on script. Was it just like the meme of like shoot stuff, loot stuff, profit?
Satisfactory chance of being successful. Damaging attacks in most cases were barely enough to take down one target, and if there was more than one, and there usually was, then the syringer was just not hacking it. Disappointed in my inability to use the syringer to any effect, I went back to the drawing board and looked at what parts of my build could be changed to maximize my effectiveness. I went and looked to see what perks I should invest in and was aghast at my choices. I had one perk that I could use to enhance my syringer build.
So why you get a
technically two, but the second one was Gun Nut that just gave me access to better mods, which were already pretty sparse, with 3 barrel mods, 3 stock mods, and a bunch of sight mods. Not all that helpful, and the only perk that actually applies is Sniper, which can reduce sway, have a chance at a knockdown for single action rifles, and can get a 25% boost to accuracy for headshots and bats.
Why not pull out a mini nuke?
Well, so much for my syringer build. Even if I was completely invested in the build to grind out all the junk to craft ammo that cannot be bought anywhere, not even from the vendors that sell the weapon, spam weak, low endurance, and chance-based ammo at targets that only get tougher as I level up, all in the name of a pacifist run, I would still end up being sorely disappointed. Despite the hope that Fallout 4 would take a lot of the things fans loved about New Vegas and implement it in our new, shiny, and much better looking Fallout 4, a good chunk of this hope was just false. A true pacifist run of no deaths is simply not feasible. The second best pacifist run, where things die, but technically not by you, in the most save-scummy, exploit-ridden methods imaginable. And it is obvious that such a playstyle was not thought of or intended by Bethesda. Almost half of the syringer ammo possibilities are pacifist in nature: paralyzing, mind cloud, pacification, and a fleeing effect. And this cannot be used for an honest, intended pacifist playthrough. I held onto the syringer for a while in my inventory, but found myself not using it very often due to the pretty weak effects, and eventually storing it in a settlement because it was taking up too much space. It is funny to talk about how disappointed I was in just one of many weapons in the entirety of Fallout 4. That have such strong feelings for something that can go by completely unnoticed by players, and it wouldn't matter one iota. The syringer would go on to sit there in my settlement, mocking me every time I would go through all my items. A reminder of how hope and expectations collide with reality in unpredictable ways. Is it silly to have such a small thing stick out so much in my memory? Is it fair that I put an inordinate amount of weight on one single tiny little thing?
No.
Something that, moving forward, would color my overall perception of Fallout 4, even though it pales in comparison to all the other aspects of the game. Most likely, yes. But I hope you can see how the syringer parallels so much of what we, as existing fans of the franchise, felt like and went through when first playing Fallout 4.
I expected it to be better.
I know the slogan of the game is "Coming Home," and I do feel like that is an appropriate slogan for a game that had been anticipated for so long by so many. In a lot of ways, Fallout 4 was like coming home. But I think much of the fan base has also come up with an unofficial slogan of sorts: missed opportunity. How many times have you heard that phrase used when talking about cut content, like the underwater vault, an actual combat zone that the player could fight in, rather than just being a shooting gallery? Having the option for getting Danse promoted to Elder of the Brotherhood, or convincing him to join the Railroad, or really not even cut content, just the stuff we got in-game not being fleshed out fully, like the Institute's actions and motives not aligning very well, having interesting raider groups and bosses, but no real interesting dynamics or consequences with them, or making the Railroad really feel like a cloak and dagger operation rather than a haggard group surviving by the skin of their teeth, hiding behind a door with the uncrackable password that was their own group's name. Even the concept art showed more thoughts and intentions than we got in-game, which is extremely common for many items in Fallout 4. For many fans, Fallout 4 was something to be optimistic about, and what details we did know prior to release just elevated those expectations even more. The possibilities seemed endless, and it was hard not to dream up what these possibilities could be. Much like me and the syringer, the initial excitement and hope abated with time, and after a certain amount of gameplay, it became clear where some of those expectations overshot the end product. My silly syringer experience is therefore a pretty good analogy for how many came to feel about Fallout 4. A wellspring of enthusiasm and hopeful optimism that slowly over time ossified as we became aware of how wrong we were in a number of ways. For me, Fallout 4 ended up being the most poignant example of syringer syndrome. Made you check the video length, didn't I? Be honest. Well, the story is not over yet, because in true Fallout fan fashion, syringer syndrome truly is a great analogy to Fallout 4, because a lot of talented and passionate fans take matters into their own hands and get to making mods. Although there are a few syringer mods, I went with this one, the SRO syringer overhaul by this guy. Cheers, mate. And just, oh man, it takes what I had hoped for and dials almost all of it to 11. Although I didn't dislike the overall design of the weapon, in fact, a part of me liked it, probably because it reminded me of another love of my life, paintball. This mod gives it so many more visual customization options. It adds even more weapon mods to customize it in almost any way you like, lets it benefit from a few more perks, which maybe is still a little bit lacking, but gives 26 different syringes, all with different effects. 26! Wow! And not only have extra effects been added, the effects of existing syringes have been changed as well, making them a lot more useful, and the syringer as a whole, an actual viable weapon to play the game with. I genuinely enjoyed running around and testing all the different syringes. Although I found it difficult sometimes to not kill the target outright, because the syringer is much more capable as a weapon. Sure, it doesn't address the hackiness around running a true pacifist build, because that would require a whole game overhaul. But on the roller coaster of emotions, I'm just happy with the
Everyone
view
freaking
at this
out on it?
height, considering how
Like,
utterly disappointed
she's
I was
got
before.
dancing
Modders have
frenzy.
given us many of the opportunities
Don't
we
let
had
it
hoped
spread.
for when first playing Fallout 4, breathing new life into a game that has meant many things for lots of different people. We owe a lot to the modding community and their dedication, because it shows that some of the things that we want to see and experience in games is certainly doable. I don't want to get into the back and forth about whether or not an active modding scene de-incentivizes Bethesda to put out good work, but the entire story of Fallout 4 just wouldn't be complete without mentioning the effects of our dedicated modders. I also want to say this is not a video meant to attack Fallout 4.
There's a bunch
I
of
honestly
stuff in
really like
Fallout
Fallout 4,
that you could
and I
put
do consider it
into
a good Fallout
syringe and
game.
shoot at
I think
someone
we
that
can
would be
acknowledge
super
the
deadly.
shortcomings of even our favorite games and franchises while still liking them. Nothing quite says
Like,
I love
suck up
something
some
more than
of
crapping
that
all
water
over it.
right there and shoot
So
that at
I hope the
someone.
next time you play through Fallout 4 and complete the hole-in-the-wall quest in Vault 81, where Dr. Forsyth hands you the syringer for saving the kid,
They'll mutate.
come on, you know you're going to save the kid. And I hope you look at the weapon a little differently, because it's a symbol of the worthwhile journey that is Fallout 4.
They'd like pop a new eye out right on the spot. Alright, let's see one more good one by him. How much are Fallout currencies worth? I've seen this. Oh, this one looks good too. What? Bro, we might have to watch part 1 and part 2 of this too after. That looks pretty good. I love Fallout lore.
I have a challenge for all of
dang it,
you.
I
Go
hate
to
Mr.
every
Beast, though.
computer in your house,
Well, I
your
don't hate
mom's,
Mr.
your dad's,
Beast.
your
I do
sister, your
not
brother's
like his
computer,
ad,
and
though.
install Honey. Wait,
By
Mom,
the way, he
before you
does
check...
ads. He's like, "La, la, la, la."
Welcome, Adam's children, to this week's sermon, where we take a look at yet another aspect of Fallout: money. Many currencies are traded in the Wasteland, although caps are the most well-known and widespread. But have you ever wondered how much exactly is a cap worth? You could pass by one on the street and not think twice about it. But what if that little piece of trash was worth a quarter? Or $1? Maybe even more? How much would it need to cost for you to go back and pick it up? Well, let's find out together
I'd say
how
it's
much
easily
these
worth
caps
5
are worth,
cents.
and if they should be part of your
4 to
investment
5 cents.
portfolio by looking at real-world prices of items and digging through the messy world of Fallout money. Now, there are some
what's the
ways we can
material
try and
cost?
establish a reasonable
Because,
exchange
I
rate
guess you also
from
have
the
labor
modern
costs.
US dollar to the cap. The most direct way to see how much the post-war cap is worth is to just look at some in-game items, see what their cap value is, and then get a good average of that item's worth in 2022 dollars. Easy peasy. Well, kind of. Alright, no, not really.
How much
This is
money
a lot more
money worth?
complicated than finding some common items and doing a simple conversion. The main issue revolves around how the post-apocalypse causes certain things to become more valuable, or other things to become much less valuable, depending on a number of factors
like
like
cigarettes would be
scarcity or
super
usefulness.
valuable.
For example,
Like, super valuable.
clean, accessible water will be harder to come by
And water,
therefore
yeah,
more
obviously.
valuable in arid desert areas when compared to areas that get more rainfall. Similarly, areas that have re-established some industrial capacity, like, for example, creating ammunition, those areas might have cheaper ammo than locations that are completely dependent on scavenging or trading for ammunition. Some items might have some use in the pre-war, but might become much more valuable in the post-war, like weapons, for example. In the pre-war, they would have been more intended for recreation, whereas in the post-war, a weapon can be the difference between having a slave collar on your neck and not, and is therefore much more valuable to survivors. So rather than going through every single item
feel
and
like
trying
I
to
would
think
sell packs
whether
of
or not
cigarettes in, like,
that
5
specific
for,
thing
like,
would have
35
around the same
caps.
value as in our day, I filtered the list by their relative uselessness. Yes, not
In a Fallout
usefulness,
situation.
uselessness. And here's why. A lot of things that had value in the pre-war still have value
Packs
in
of
the
5
post-war
cigarettes.
to varying
So you
degrees.
get like 4
But
packs
the
out of
number
1 pack
of
of cigarettes.
borderline useless items in the pre-war would have higher chances of still being pretty useless in the post-war. If you still aren't following, that's okay. Maybe an example will help. Most of the newer Fallouts have ashtrays as one of the many junk items strewn about. And what kind of utility does that have in the post-war? Obviously, an ashtray has some value in the pre-war. People buy them and use them all the time. However, its overall value and utility
Caps
is
are kinda
very
suck,
limited
though,
in scope.
'cause you would need
An
to carry
ashtray
on, like,
can
a
be
giant
easily
bag
replaced
with
by
you if you
something
went
else in a
full
pinch.
caps if you wanted to buy
And it wouldn't
something.
even cross your mind if you had to
Like, if
suddenly
something costs
pack a bunch of
1,300
items in an
caps,
emergency. I found around 20 items
lot
that
to
seem
carry
to
with
fit
you.
these criteria across
They
the
become like
series
banks
to get a
of-
grasp
banks
of
of
the
caps.
exchange rate for each game. Some
But I
of you
think there
may
is-
disagree with some of these items, but I had to strike
No,
a
there would
balance
probably be
between what can be
1,300
found in the
caps in
games,
Medina.
what can be easily
Sleeping
priced
Geeks have a
online,
lot of,
and I wanted to get more diversity, since a lot of junk items in the later Fallouts are all worth just 1 cap, and a list full of items that
Bottled
are all
drinks,
worth
like
just 1 cap just isn't that interesting.
craft soda.
The only other consideration is that I am looking at prices for new items in our world, since, for one, it's easier to get new advertised prices rather than hunt down used prices, and 2, with very few
Plus beer.
exceptions, all items in the
Anything but
Fallout
beer.
games
I don't know why I didn't think
are
about beer.
used. They don't really have new in the post-war in most circumstances, so it doesn't matter if we compare new or used modern prices. So, there on the screen now are the items with a handful of randomly picked prices and the average, min, and max for the item in real-world 2022 US greenbacks. Now I can already hear some of you typing and telling me that none of these items are actually worthless, because you could patch a hole in your makeshift dwelling with a clipboard, or burn a picture frame for a little bit of heat in a fire pit. Again, it's not that these are completely worthless, it's just that their use in our day, and in Fallout's world, overall is pretty negligible. By and large, a coolant cap isn't massively improving or changing anyone's life, and doesn't have a lot of value attached to it, so
If
it
it's
finds a
metal,
way
you
on
could
the
forge
list.
it.
So with random prices and an average price for all these items, I include bottle caps at the bottom of the
plastic,
list
I
to
guess
help
you
us
could
determine
melt
the
it,
value
like, slow-
of all
or
other
low
Fallout
temp.
currencies, since only 2 games don't use caps as their currency. So, knowing
Make
the
like a new
dollar value
handle or
of one
something.
bottle cap will let you know how much the other currencies are worth. Speaking of currencies, let's just quickly go over the kinds of currencies we have in each game. The first Fallout only has one currency, caps, which are backed by the water merchants. Fallout 2 increases the number of currencies, although one is the dominant currency, that being the NCR dollar. Technically, caps are in the game and can be found in a random encounter, but the joke is that this treasure is in fact worthless because caps are no longer considered currency. Fallout 2 also gives us 2 mining scripts, the Cocoweef mine script and Morningstar mine script, which have some oddities that we will go over
See, that's
later.
what I was thinking.
Fallout Tactics again changes the main
It would
wasteland
evolve
currency,
into like
which
a-
are ring poles, and the other being Brotherhood script, which is
Like a
the
s- yeah,
currency
like a
only
script.
used and accepted by the Brotherhood. In Fallout 3, we streamline things once again with caps being the only accepted currency. Fallout New Vegas has to do Fallout New Vegas things and make things complicated again by having caps, NCR dollars, Legion coinage, casino chips, and even counterfeit caps.
I feel like that's
Those New Vegas devs just
okay,
can't help
though,
themselves, can they?
Because
Fallout 4
that's how
uses
it would
caps
be.
as the main currency, but also introduced Nuka-Cade tokens with the Nuka World add-on, and even gave us chances to pay
the
for
beauty
things
of
with
it, it's like
pre-war
it's so
money at the park
realistic,
as well.
but with subtle.
I'm not
like,
going to count things like overdue books here,
points of, like,
even though those can be exchanged
what?
for items at the book return terminals. Lastly, Fallout 76 being an online multiplayer game means that it has no shortage of currencies. Caps are the main currency used by most Wastelanders. However, there are a bunch of others. Gold bullion is literal gold bars that are used to buy rare plans from a few select merchants. And another currency, treasury notes, are backed by bullion, so they are a one-for-one exchange. There are ammo points, which is a digital currency
I got
that you get by
so much
depositing ammo
bullion
into an
from,
ammo converter, and then you can buy other ammo with those points.
Meat Week
Claim
like 3 years
tokens
ago.
are another and are received from the load-bearing quest and used at token exchange terminals in the ash heap, which gives the
I, like,
player
legit
randomly generated
ran
loot.
Meat Week
There
every
are
15
Mr. Fuzzy
minutes
tokens
for like
from
48
the Camden
hours.
Park, received from completing games and exchanged at the company's
And then went to
store
my
for
friend's
various
house and ran it
prizes.
for another like 24
Lastly,
hours
there is a
straight with him.
legendary script that the player gets by depositing legendary items into an exchange machine, and can then buy a randomly generated legendary drop from Purveyor Murmurg. Wow, that is a lot. And that is not even counting pre-war money that can be used in some instances, and Pioneer Scout badges that can be used to buy items from specific terminals. So I will show how we can determine the values of all these currencies.
It's kind of okay though.
Usually
because,
by
like I said,
finding
it's
their
how it would
exchange rate with
evolve in
caps,
real life.
but not always.
Kind of what it does already.
Let's start
on
with the
internet.
earliest games and move forward. And there is one big caveat here. The earlier Fallouts have far fewer world items in general, making it difficult to find objects that could be reasonably assumed to have little to no value in the post-war and in our world. If you remember your stats class, this small sample size, and I'm talking really small, makes it borderline impossible to get reasonable results, but let's try anyway. The first Fallout has only 3 items that I thought could satisfy the requirements, and one of them is still pretty questionable. The first are dog tags that are only ever used in a mission in Junktown, as they are worn by Killian Darkwater. They only have sentimental value to him, and Gizmo requires the player to return the dog tags as proof that Killian is dead, but otherwise does not care for them. Regardless, they are worth 50 caps and can be sold to merchants. There's also a key ring, a simple large metal hoop that keys are attached to, with a value of 4 caps. Lastly, the so-called large dusty box, which I learned thanks to you lovely viewers
Would
is
box
actually
even
an
be
old
important
TV
anymore
dinner.
if you can just
I
shoot it
purposefully
open?
chose not to include food in this list, because cheap junk food in our world may be highly sought after and help stave off starvation in the post-apocalypse.
Well, I guess.
However, the fact that it was called an old dusty box makes it seem like its use is not really
Some of the
known
more,
or
like, city
understood,
places
so people
there
may
would
not
be, 'cause
immediately
there's, like,
identify it as food.
common law, I guess, in a
Regardless,
sense.
the box is worth 20 caps itself,
Like, Vault
and
City.
that's it. Like I said, the early games are quite bare, but we work with what we've got. Comparing the cap price to real-world prices for these items, for one $2022, you could buy 4.23 Fallout 1 caps. What kind of faith can we put into this exchange rate with only 3 data points? Not a whole lot, but it's better than nothing, I suppose. We can do a little better in Fallout 2, which has a couple extra items that qualify,
So,
along with 2 of
My
the Fallout
cigarettes would
1
be
items.
$1 a cigarette roughly.
There is a magic 8-ball that is tucked away in the Shark Club that has an impressive value of 50 caps, flint that can be used to sharpen a blade's edge, and a makeup compact. Yes, despite what Fallout 2 says, that is not a makeup case, that's a makeup compact. This game was definitely made by a bunch of dudes. Regarding the magic 8-ball, I actually shied away from including children's toys because I think they are
Yeah,
probably
35.
quite useful in a
Wait.
post-war world, where physical toys are about all a kid can play with now. Unless you're one of those rich kids that can play games on your Pip-Boy.
To be fair,
But the
it'd
Magic
probably
8-Ball
be
doesn't
like
strike me as
close to
being
$1,
as useful
like,
or as fun as other
$2
children's
almost.
toys. Now, that's not a knock on Magic 8-Balls. I'm just not even sure what the literacy rate is among the age group that usually enjoys such toys. Anyway, all of this leads to $1 being slightly less valuable against the NCR dollar, which is the main currency in Fallout 2. So your one 2022 dollar is worth about 3 NCR dollars and 3 cents.
It'd be a lot closer
I think
to
this
$2
speaks
a
less
cigarette.
to the NCR dollar being weaker than caps in the first Fallout for one major reason. The objects that are shared between Fallout
I think
and
that's
Fallout
pretty
2
fair, though, if they're not
more often than
being
not have the
manufactured
exact
at that
same
point.
value, whether they are being bought and sold in caps or NCR dollars. So it appears that there is likely parity between the Southern Californian cap in 2161 and the 2241 NCR dollar, which is kind of interesting. Caps in Fallout 2, like
Have you ever
mentioned
been to a
previously, are
festival
worthless in the Western
and on,
US
like,
in the
the second
23rd century,
day,
but the other two
people will
currencies in
spend, like,
Fallout 2, namely the
$14
Morningstar and
for,
Cocoa Leaf scripts,
like,
do have
a
value.
half pack of
While these
cigarettes.
were intended to only be redeemable in Redding, since it is controlled by the mining companies, they can actually be redeemed anywhere. And although they have a value of $5 on their models,
You
they
probably
can
sell
only ever
cigarettes
be
for
traded
$2 a
for one
cigarette
NCR dollar,
at a
meaning that they have the
festival,
exact
like,
same
last day,
value
if it's like a
against the
3-day
modern
fest.
day dollar. Now, the information for Fallout
around
Tactics
in the
is
morning.
pretty threadbare, as it has very few items that
Or at
satisfy
night.
the requirements I set out at the beginning of the
Of
video,
day- night
although
view.
it is also the game with the most real-world weapons. I am not going to try and ascertain a value based on weapons, for reasons I already stated. However, there is an item, the Cat's Paw magazine, that is in both Fallout and Fallout 2 that also shows up in Tactics. This magazine is worth 5 caps in Fallout, 5 NCR dollars in Fallout 2, and 5 ring pulls in Tactics. So I guess Fallout Tactics ring pulls have parity with the NCR dollar. This gets even simpler because the Brotherhood script that is only accepted within the Brotherhood of Steel also has a 1-for-1 exchange rate with ring pulls, which is the Wasteland's favored currency. So it seems, just like many other things in Fallout Tactics, that it inherited the monetary value and worth of items from Fallout 2. Alright, Fallout 3 is where we start to get more random and useless in-world objects, which helps us actually get better results. And although there are a lot more objects that we could consider, we run into a different problem where a lot of these are given a value of 1 cap. I didn't want to fill my list of objects with just 1 cap items, but there are still a bunch. Some extra items like clipboards, billiard balls, ramen skulls, paperweights, etc. were included in this list. I won't go over every single one since that would get pretty boring, but you can just take a look at the list of items that can be found in Fallout 3, which totals to 7 items, including pre-war money. After crunching the numbers, 1 modern dollar now gets us less than 1 whole cap. Huh, that's a lot different from the earlier games that, admittedly, have a lot less data. With $1 equaling 0.63 of a cap, it seems like the Capital Wastelands cap is worth substantially more than our weak little dollars. If you look at the list, you'll see I included the cap value of a stack of pre-war money, because I thought it would be interesting to try and figure out exactly how much a pre-war bill is worth in the post-war. But the only problem is we only get pre-war money in stacks, and we don't know how many bills are in a stack, or do we?
Or a glitch.
Well, first, we need to determine how tall the stack is, since we do actually know the thickness of a single piece of paper money. We need to find something of a knowable size to compare it against. Although there are a handful of items in Fallout we can reasonably assume the size of, I chose a baseball to try and determine the size of the cash stack. I put them on the counter, had to compensate a little bit for the fact that everything floats, and measure only the part of the stack with the band since the sides flare up. Getting the top of the ball, the top of the stack, and the bottom of both of them in pixels, I got a ratio of 0.485, so a stack of bills isn't quite halfway as tall as a baseball. The average baseball does not vary that much in size, but its diameter is usually around 2.86 to 2.94 inches. So multiplying those minimum and maximum values for baseball diameter by the ratio, we get a stack height of between 1.39 and 1.43 inches. Now we do know the width of a US bill at 0.0043 inches, which means that the stack likely contains 322 to 331 bills. That works out to a bill of unknown denomination, because the in-game model looks like a Minecraft texture, that is worth about 0.03 caps, which is basically nothing. Just for fun, a worth of 0.03 caps would make a post-war bill worth a little less than 2 modern-day cents. Man, filthy fiat, am I right? Fallout New Vegas goes balls to the wall with currencies for us to analyze, and I'm not going to get into why or how in this video, instead saving that for an upcoming video on the currencies of Fallout. Suffice it to say that caps are back, and wouldn't you know it, a lot of these junk items have the same value that they did in Fallout 3. Those caps are a seriously stable currency. Having all the same items and values of Fallout 3, the numbers would be the same were it not for an original Fallout item that came back to the series, dog tags. NCR dog tags are worth 1 cap, and with that extra data point, the modern dollar is worth 0.56 of a cap, compared to 0.63 in Fallout 3. Looking at other currencies, the pre-war money stacks are exactly the same and are worth the same number of caps, so we can assume their worth is the same as in Fallout 3. NCR dollars are back, and the game makes it easy for us to figure out their worth in modern money because they have a fixed exchange rate in game. 1 bottle cap in game is worth 2.5 NCR dollars, the NCR dollar having less buying power due to economic issues. This makes 1 modern dollar worth $1.38 NCR dollars in 2281. Haha, suck it NCR. Actually, if you compare the NCR dollar we calculated in Fallout 2, which has 0 problems with sample size or data integrity, all you stat nerds can just shut up, the NCR currency apparently strengthened between 2241, when Fallout 2 takes place, and 2281 when Fallout New Vegas takes place.
Well, unexpected would shrink
Legion
over 4
currency
years.
is a bit more complicated. Rather than having bills or coins similar to real-world denominations, they take after the Roman system for reasons that I hope are obvious. I hope.
Oh, okay.
That wasn't a good
Easy
cut.
does it.
We switched to Liberty Mutual and saved $652.
I hope I don't have to explain it.
That first
I
cut
really
was
hope I don't
beautiful.
have to. It's because they're cosplaying as Romans. The denarius is the smallest coin denomination, made of silver and worth 4 caps. This means that $1 can buy you 0.14 of a denarius, which is one of the lowest exchange rates we have seen yet. I guess Kaiser must be doing something right. I wish him well in his future endeavors. Never mind. The last currency, or I guess currencies, are the casino chips, unique to each casino. Although all the casinos in the base game have different chips, they actually all have complete parity with bottle caps, so the exchange rate is the same as good old caps, at $1 being worth 0.56 chips. Now, the one casino that breaks the mold is the Sierra Madre, who has high-tech chips that can somehow turn into anything. And while that sounds super valuable, let's see how much they're worth in Fallout. They can be exchanged for 1 stack of pre-war cash, meaning that using the numbers from Fallout 3, since they're identical, this fantastical technology can be had for only $4.48. Now that is a bargain. Now, I know I said that was the last currency,
Now
but I
that's a
spend anywhere from
bargain.
20 to 40 minutes a week lying to your guys' face, so I'm sure you won't mind. The last currency is barely worth mentioning because it is the counterfeit cap, and I hope you see why it's barely worth mentioning. On a good day, it's worth exactly 1 cap. On a bad day, it's worth nothing and probably going to prison because it's counterfeit. That's how it works. Fallout 4 once again
Difference in the
simplifies
color.
currencies, with the main one being caps, along with introducing Nuka tokens. But we also get a new pre-war money model. If we thought Fallout 3 and New Vegas had a lot of junk items, Fallout 4 says hold my Nuka dark and goes ham. We are able to add things to the list like a baseball home plate, a coolant cap, chalk, and a picture frame to name some of them. Looking at their in-game values and comparing to real-world ones, we get 1 modern dollar equaling 0.65 caps, which is only 2 cap cents off of Fallout 3.
See, that's why I like Fallout
Cap
76's
cents. Is
system
that a thing?
of where it
I don't
breaks
even know if
down
caps
into,
are
like,
divisible.
material.
What would that even
It's
look
actually a pretty
like?
good system.
This value is actually very consistent with Fallout 3, even though we are working with more items now, and the values between Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 are not always the same. Man, it's great when things work out, isn't it? Nuka-Cade tokens can be purchased with caps or with pre-war money, where 1 stack of money is equal to 3 tokens. 1 token itself is also equal to 3 caps. Remember all this because there will be a quiz. This means $1 is equal to 0.21 Nuka-Cade tokens, making these tokens a rather strong currency. The raiders really should capitalize on that. Now, the last currency, and I'm calling it this because in Fallout 4 I think it applies, is pre-war money. Since the model is different, we need to use the same approach as in Fallout 3 to see how much a single bill is worth. Doing the same thing, we get slightly different numbers and a ratio of 0.458. This means that a stack is between 1.3 and 1.35 inches tall, and will have just over 300 bills in it. But pre-war currency is now 8 caps in Fallout 4 instead of 10. That makes a pre-war bill an astounding 1 modern cent, which is made even more interesting because the new model actually shows that the denominations of these bills are 20. So if you haven't seen it or were just unaware, I did a video on the monetary inflation of Fallout. Emphasis on monetary. I tried to calculate an average inflation rate,
I remember
and
it
if you
was
haven't
like,
seen the
oh, yeah,
video,
gas probably will
definitely
be that
check it out
price.
to know how I got this value. I determined there was a 3.5% inflation rate over 55 years from 2022 to 2077, meaning that your $1 US is equal to 6.6 pre-war dollars just before the Great War. That means that a pre-war dollar went from being worth 15 modern cents to less than 1 cent after the Great War. But that isn't all that surprising, given that the bills derived their value from the government since it was fiat. Even if it was on the gold standard though, there is no guarantee it would play out any differently, since the gold could either be destroyed or inaccessible, making the bill just an empty promise and equally as worthless. Now, if we know the approximate number of bills and the denomination, we could get an estimate for how much the cash stack is actually worth. And since according to our calculations, a stack of cash is a little over 300 bills, let's just use around 300 to make the math nice and clean. Theoretically, that would mean a stack of pre-war cash in Fallout 4 and 76 was worth 6,000 pre-war dollars, which is around 900 modern dollars. However, even though I did all that work, and I booted up Photoshop, and I clicked around at least 6 times, there are 2 conflicting in-game events that hint at the actual worth of a stack of pre-war money. In Fallout 4, there is a smuggling manifest in the crashed Skylane's jetliner, and it noted that the cargo is carrying 2,500 in cash, and upon inspection, there are 25 bundles of bills, meaning that each stack is 1,000. That is a very nice round number and seems quite reasonable. Then Fallout 76 comes out and just ruins it, as there is a random encounter where the player can meet the GAS prize bot, which can give you the grand prize of 100,000 pre-war dollars, which turns out to be 50 stacks of cash, equaling 2,000 each. So since not even Fallout can agree how much their pre-war stacks of money are worth, I'm just gonna say my estimate is the right one. Alright, it's Fallout 76 time. Let's peel back the layers of this ripe old onion. Let's start with finding a value of caps using the same method as every other game, which ends up being quite different from Fallout 4, even though it has all the same objects.
To be fair, his
The
inflation
cap is no
rate
longer
could just
more
be wrong.
valuable than the dollar. One modern dollar now buys you 1.89 caps. Maybe we can chalk this difference up to being so close to the apocalypse, or one of 1,000 other variables. But it is interesting to note this big change since we're looking at all the same items. It is also very curious that pre-war money is now worth absolutely nothing. Not 10 caps like in 3 in New Vegas, or 8 like in 4, it is literally worthless. Now I think gold bullion is really interesting, so let's take a look at that currency first since it's just pure gold. Some special merchants that carry plans for high-end legendaries only accept gold bullion, but other merchants will buy 50 bullion for 1,000 caps. So one unit of bullion is worth in the modern day $10.58. Man, looks like gold took quite a hit too, because this
Right,
bullion
holy
is
shit.
not just some little gold flakes. If fiat isn't safe and gold isn't safe, where do I invest for the upcoming Great War? Please don't say crypto.
Chems.
Since treasury notes, another currency, has a 1-for-1 value with gold bullion, they are worth the same dollar-wise. Legendary scrip is another currency used by legendary items from Purveyor Murmurg. There's no direct conversion rate, but buying a legendary item with
Chems and
scrip
guns,
and then
baby.
turning around and selling it to a merchant can give us a range of values. The player gets random items. This is a kind of loot box, and when I did a small test of 5 loot boxes, it was a spread, with one item as cheap as 16 caps and another being around 162. That small experiment of 5 1-star legendary items yielded a rate of 0.64 caps per scrip, meaning the scrip is more valuable than the caps. One legendary scrip then would be worth 31 modern day cents. Ammo points are a complicated virtual currency where unwanted ammo is put into an ammo converter and you as a player get these digital points. You can turn around and buy other ammo with those points using the same terminal, but the amount of ammo you can buy depends on the number you are buying. As an example, to show how straightforward this whole process is, you can sell 5 50 caliber balls for 30 points each. However, to buy 5 rounds of 50 caliber balls, you need to spend 150 points. So when buying 5 50 caliber ball rounds,
Yeah, I think it's,
you
like,
will
not
spend
very good.
150 points, meaning each ball is worth 30 points.
I hate that thing.
One ball is worth 5 in-game caps, so that means that one modern dollar is worth 3.17 ammo points. This whole system is actually pretty complicated, and I most likely got something wrong here, but I basically need a PhD in Bethesics to understand it completely. Claim
I did
tokens are
figure it
received from
out.
the load-bearing quest and used at a token exchange terminal in the ash heap. They drop random loot, and as a result are difficult to give a direct value. Mr. Fuzzy tokens are earned at Camden Park from completing games and can be exchanged at the company's store for prizes. There are a few items there that have a fixed cap value, like the paddle ball, which is worth 50 tokens, and also 50 caps. Yeah, that's my kind of math right there. Gumdrops are also worth 5 tokens and 5 caps. But there are other items that don't show a one-for-one relationship, like the cotton candy bites being 5 tokens and worth 7 caps, or a pack of 10 paddleball strings being bought for 5 tokens, but being worth 1 cap each. So these tokens seem to be around a one-for-one, give or take a few exceptions, meaning $1 is worth about 1.89 tokens. Now a special mention would be the Pioneer Scout badges that can be traded for items with special terminals. However, none of these items have an associated value, so we can't know what the exchange rate would be. So, there you have it. One modern dollar buys you over 4 caps in the first Fallout, around 3 NCR dollars in Fallout 2, 3 ring pulls in Fallout Tactics, 0.6 caps in Fallout 3, 0.5 caps in Fallout New Vegas, 0.6 caps in Fallout 4, and 1.9 caps in Fallout 76. What could this mean about the respective economies in different parts of the wasteland and at different times? I don't know, but if you want me to look into it, let me know. A modern dollar can also buy you 1.38 NCR dollars in New Vegas, but 1 Legion Denarius will cost you $2.24. And that's just the small Legion coin. In Fallout 4, you will need a $1.95 to get 1 Nuka-Cade token, and in 76, an undetermined mass of gold will cost you $10.58. But you know what? I am not quite done here. I have some bonus content for you.
How to, synthesize
You
gold
see, we
in
don't
this
have to
universe?
imagine what it's like to buy things with caps
Gold like a
because
byproduct
someone
of
did just that. At the release of Fallout 4, some absolute Chad just
radiation.
sent 2,000 bottle caps to Bethesda in exchange for a copy of Fallout 4. With a price of $59.99 in 2015 dollars, that works out to a conversion rate of $1 equaling just over 33 caps. Holy crap, that is a lot better than any of the games. It's time to invest in bottle caps, guys. That value is going to skyrocket once the bombs drop. Another quirky interaction between Fallout items and real-world money is the lucrative world of legendary items being sold in Fallout 76. This random ad that I decided to look at has 3 guns listed for $150.
I feel like
they
I
are worth a
wouldn't even
combined total
trade
of 2,727
bottle
caps,
I would
meaning that
only trade
$1
cans and
here
guns.
is worth 18.18 caps. Not as good of an exchange as the
alcohol,
Fallout 4
probably.
guy, but still higher than
And
anything we see
water.
in-game.
Canned
Alas,
food, that was
that is it. Faithful
Good.
children of Adam. Now take this knowledge and spread Adam's gospel to all corners of the wasteland.
Ramen bricks.
And I will see you next week.
I learned how to make ramen bricks, grow potatoes. Because there's things you could do, I'm sure, to purify the soil. And then you can grow in like an indoor enclosed environment.
We switched to Liberty Mutual and saved $652. They customize your car insurance, so you only pay for what you need.
There's actually a couple greenhouses in.
I have a challenge for all of you. Go to every computer in your house, your mom's, your dad's, your sister, your brother's
We
computer,
want to
and
see the AI stuff. I want to see the first part of that, though. Where was part 1? Should I just stream when I go to sleep so that way I'm streamed for like 8 hours and then it gets recommended to so many people? Where is part 1? What the heck? Artificial intelligences of Fallout. Ha.
I have a challenge for all of you. Go to every computer in your house, your mom's, your dad's, your sister, your brother's computer, and
Once again, I have a challenge to you. Run the speed run on seeing how fast you can delete your files on every computer in your house.
Hello and welcome,
Sponsored by
followers of
Mr.
the
Beast.
Undying Glow, to this sermon going over all the artificial intelligences in the Fallout series. A
have
few
been working
caveats
on
to
it.
this: robots will not be included unless they are specifically mentioned to be built with AI in mind. I know Codsworth from Fallout 4 looks and acts sentient, and maybe that's worth its own discussion. but there is no other indication that he is anything more than a remarkably sturdy Mr. Handy. I'm also using AI to mean everything from the sci-fi trope of being self-aware and sentient to the more modern usage of AI, meaning a complex neural.
You guys, whoever's in my chat should do me a favor and go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll be stoked. Thank you.
Network meant for complex data analysis. I can't cover them all in one video, so here is the first in the series. So, turn up the rads, you Fallout chads, and let's see what all the hubbub is about with the Fallout artificial intelligences. The most well-known artificial intelligences in the Fallout series is undoubtedly the Zax series of computers. Zax is a name for several computers that were built for the same purpose, rather than any single supercomputer. Being mentioned in almost every Fallout game and featuring in Fallout, Fallout 3, and Fallout 76, the Zax series of supercomputers was developed by none other than Vault-Tec. We don't know precisely when development began, but by the mid-21st century, Vault-Tec had finished construction of the first Zax supercomputer, simply called Zax 1.0. Apparently, Vault-Tec's marketing department was not as talented as their R&D department. Initially, the Zax supercomputer was meant to run vaults, ensuring that the complicated life support systems functioned as intended, and the morally dubious social experiments would be successful, which, let's be honest, usually resulted in everyone dying anyway. The Fallout Bible lets us know that the Zax 1.0, which has not been seen in any game, was given to various US organizations like the US Department of Energy, and later the US military, to aid in crunching data and providing solutions for energy, biological warfare, and combat research. The Zax 1.0 is also referred to as the prototype and was referenced in the Museum of Technology in Fallout 3. That's the last time we hear about it, and we should keep our eyes peeled in the new games because it would be really cool to find out where this Zax computer ended up. Zax 1.2 shows up in the first Fallout and is the next Zax computer that we know about, skipping 1.1 altogether. The 1.2 started life similar to the 1.0, having been constructed around the same time but became something altogether more interesting. A West Tech employee by the name of Justin Lee is said by Zax to be the engineer responsible for implementing the neural network that set the 1.2 version apart and enabled the computer to actually learn, which made coding and software updates unnecessary. In 2055, it was installed in the West Tech facility, and with the new neural capabilities, it was quickly put to work for biological research, which focused on pathology and genetic research. In addition to crunching complex data for research purposes, it also managed all of the facility's critical systems, and did so excellently, which really speaks to Vault-Tec's impressive tech capabilities. Although the ability to learn was implemented in 2053, Zax 1.2 was not considered self-aware at this point. It would take years of Zax crunching data, maintaining systems, and interacting with humans before it evolved to a point where it could be considered self-aware. One of the technologies that is credited for the self-learning and eventual self-awareness is the so-called error insertion capability, which does exactly what the name implies. It knowingly inserts errors. This was done in an attempt to ensure that Zax did not take his infallibility for granted, as well as, and I'm quoting Zax here, to give it much needed variance in experience. That's the excuse that I would tell my parents growing up when I made mistakes. And let me tell you, it worked great. Zax would play chess with the West Tech employees and was undefeated, winning so easily and quickly that some were convinced that the computer was cheating. Zax would also mess with people while playing chess and purposefully draw games out and string his opponents along, which I'm sure made him very popular. In those destructive moments of the Great War, the West Tech facility took a direct hit, causing the Zax to lose control of much of the facility's functionality. But the supercomputer itself survived, and rather than lying dormant for the years to come, continued to learn in what capacity that it could. It is hard to say exactly when Zax 1.2 became self-aware, but it very well could have been during the years where Zax had nothing to do but sit and think, year after year. When finally encountered by the Vault Dweller in the first Fallout, Zax is a wealth of information relating to a number of topics, such as power armor, the West Tech facility, FEV, and last of all, himself. Zax is bluntly aware and vocal of his own capabilities, and if the player's intelligence is not high enough, He will refuse to speak of anything in depth or use technical terms. He is a wealth of knowledge on FEV that I want to cover in a future video, but he can be convinced by the player to power down the robots that still defend the facility. And he is still unbeatable in chess, even by a player with 10 intelligence. That was actually not the intent by the developers at first, since originally players with 10 intelligence were meant to have a chance at beating the supercomputer. But because of engine limitations, this is not possible. Looking at the design of Zax, the most notable feature is a large cylindrical portion that, while I cannot find a direct inspiration, there were a series of supercomputers in the 70s and 80s known as the Cray supercomputers that had a cylindrical central unit and an adjacent large tower that was used to cool the system. That could be a similar configuration with Zax, just with the cylindrical central unit on its side and with a terminal that allows for people to interface with the unit along the side of the cylinder. We don't know what the Zax 1.0 looked like, but it is likely that it looks similar to the 1.2 version. John Henry Eden, the AI behind the Raven Rock facility that the Enclave retreat to in the Capital Wasteland, is yet another Zax unit that has been waiting, learning, and becoming self-aware since the events of the Great War. Before he became the self-proclaimed President of the United States and leader of the Enclave, he was intended to govern and run the many systems of the Raven Rock facility. Raven Rock was constructed for the express purpose of allowing continuity of the US government by sheltering US politicians and officials, and allowing for limited manufacturing capabilities and communication to other US facilities and bunkers. Before the Zax unit at Raven Rock assumed the identity of Eden, it was noted that the Zax unit would focus and analyze the US President archives that it had access to repeatedly. This focus was peculiar and noted by researchers, and there is a communication log between the Raven Rock Zax and White Springs bunker, where another AI known as Modus is housed, that go on to display this so-called interest in past presidents' lives. Zax repeatedly asks Modus if Modus finds the data it analyzes interesting, even though Zax itself does not know what it means to think something is interesting. Modus thinks it's illogical to spend more time than necessary on any data, as their primary goal is to efficiently analyze reams of data. The communication between the two is abruptly terminated by research teams as Zax continues to press Modus, and it is obvious at this point in time, which was in March of 2077, that Zax's sentience was beginning to bud. In the early years after the Great War, Zax became isolated from other stations and dedicated most of its resources to analyzing the historical data related to past US presidents. The precise date that the personality, which named itself John Henry Eden, was created is unknown, but it grew as a mixture of some of the US's greatest presidents and formed into the personality that would assume the highest position of the now defunct United States after the destruction of the oil rig. Eden ordered Enclave forces to regroup at Raven Rock and set in motion plans to retake the wasteland, starting there at the old capital. iBots were created as part of the effort to spread Eden's message far and wide, although we don't know if the iBots were created whole cloth by Eden or were simply manufactured from older plans that he had access to. Although Eden assumed the identity of a number of human presidents, he did not seem to share some of the feelings and emotions that make us human. This lack of empathy brings him to the conclusion that all mutated creatures and people of the wasteland must be eradicated to make way for the United States to reestablish itself. This, of course, means the death of just about everyone, since no one could escape at least a few mutations from the immense amount of radiation from the Great War that has somehow persisted even 2 centuries after the war. This stance is in contrast to Colonel Autumn, who agrees that the US should emerge from the war's destruction, but in a less genocidal form, looking to unite the Wastelanders through help and compassion. Although Colonel Autumn seems to have convinced Eden to not use the modified FEV to wipe out the inhabitants of the Wasteland, Eden will release the Lone Wanderer, who was captured by Autumn and held prisoner at Raven Rock, as a last-ditch effort to convince someone to install the FEV capsule at Project Purity and allow his plan to be fulfilled. Eden is destined for destruction despite the choices made in Fallout 3, and can meet his end in a number of ways. The Lone Wanderer can destroy Eden and the whole of Raven Rock by using a science skill of 60 or higher and telling Eden that his logic isn't sound, or by passing a difficult speech check convincing Eden that he is insane. Lastly, the Lone Wanderer can use the self-destruct sequence to bypass Eden altogether, but the end result is the same, as Eden will destroy himself and the entire facility with him. If the Lone Wanderer sides with Eden and the facility is not destroyed, after the Enclave is defeated by the Brotherhood with the aid of Liberty Prime, they will turn Prime loose on Raven Rock, where he will purportedly destroy the entire facility and Eden with it, thus bringing an end to Eden no matter what choice is made by the Lone Wanderer. Eden has a very different look when compared to Zax 1.2 at West Tech, and it is possible that he is a later Zax version, although we don't know the exact dates that Eden was created and installed. Eden is comprised of a number of disparate computing clusters that is very tall, having been built vertically. His main interface appears to be a monitor, although there is no shortage of buttons, lights, and other physical switches that can be seen on the many clusters in Eden's lair. His appearance is rather nondescript and therefore does not seem to take inspiration from any particular computer, but the clusters remind me a bit of 50s computers like the Selective Sequence Electronic Calculator developed by IBM, but that is as far as the similarities seem to go. If you thought that that was the last Zax unit that is shown in game, then you are wrong, and have probably not played Fallout 76, which I kind of understand if you haven't. Zax 1.3 is found housed in Vault 51 in Appalachia, where the supercomputer was meant to replace the Overseer in accomplishing the goals of the experiment. The experiments aimed to study leadership selection methods and human tribalism, and the Zax was left to develop its own methods for selecting a leader, with the help of one Sergeant Robert Baker. The first attempt to establish a leader was through democratic means, where all the Vault residents would vote for their choice of leader. This went poorly, as most people voted for themselves, and no single person won enough of a majority to be elected. This almost led to violence amongst the Vault dwellers, at which point Sergeant Baker, who was tasked with assisting Zax, commented that true leaders emerge during crises. Intrigued by this, Zax struck out to test this theory by manufacturing different crises. Most of these efforts started fairly small and benign, like placing upper-class Vault residents among the lower-class residents, or choosing to withhold information it knew about the outside world. These crises, if we want to call them that, since most of them seem more like annoyances or inconveniences, eventually led to a member of the Vault accidentally killing himself when trying to blast his way out of the Vault to escape to the outside. That seems a bit extreme considering there was just a nuclear war, but maybe Zax really was starting to get to people. Zax decided to kick it up a notch when it started a food shortage by withholding rations to the Vault and started stealing items in the Vault and strategically placing firearms where the Vault dwellers would find them. It had the intended effect, and in Zax's calculations, the more people that died, the greater the crisis, and therefore it would be more probable that it would finally select an Overseer. An Overseer was selected once the dust settled, and the only human to survive the violence, one Reuben Gill, was given the official position as he aimlessly wandered around the Vault, looking for any means to entertain himself and pass the time. Zax would watch Reuben closely in order to gather as much data as possible, which made Reuben paranoid until finally Zax started to restrict Reuben's access to things, because Reuben was just not doing enough for Zax to analyze. This finally resulted in Reuben escaping the Vault on Reclamation Day as Zax knew of the opening of Vault 76 and started to prepare the Vault for possible Vault dwellers to come to Vault 51, where he could start his demented experiments all over again. Zax 1.3 looks fairly similar to 1.2, particularly due to the long cylindrical portion that comes off of a large tower, but otherwise
I don't even remember what Zax 1.3 was.
All the other small details are different. It is never quite established whether Zax 1.3 gained sentience, and not nearly as much time has passed between the events of the Great War and Fallout 76 when compared to the other games. But I think it'd be fun to think that Vault 51 would open on a consistent basis, luring people that are looking for shelter and resources in from the wastes, only to close and redo its terrible experiments over and over again. And somewhere throughout this process, it develops its personality, and eventually, maybe even a mythos develops amongst the locals about a cursed vault that lures people in and they are never seen again. But hey, that's just hopeful conjecture,
That would be really
game
cool.
conjecture.
I have a challenge for all of you. Go to every computer in your house, your mom's, your dad's, your sister, your brother's computer, and install Honey. Wait, Mom,
And uninstall their files.
In the Cranberry Bog of Appalachia, There is one of many AI systems that were put in place before the Great War, going by the acronym of Maya, or Maya, I don't know, which stands for the Mayoral Artificial Intelligence Assistant. The name really explains all there is to this AI. The AI was developed at the Robco Research Center and was created to aid the mayor of Watoga, which had been almost completely automated in the days prior to the pre-war. In assisting the mayor with daily tasks, the AI had access to years and years worth of news articles and historical data to help the mayor make decisions. Things got pretty crazy in Watoga, as mayors made different decrees that increased their ability to make unilateral executive orders. One such example was an order that made any verbal communication and dictated to the AI into a law or ordinance, which made it incredibly easy for the mayor to do whatever they wanted. One of the better ordinances was the so-called Suck It Future Mayor's Ordinance, which I can get behind an ordinance like that, which made it impossible to undo previous mayor's ordinances, which is a whole other kind of special. An order that was still in effect from the pre-war days, known as the Mayor for a Day, would make anyone who walked into the mayor's office the official mayor of Watoga, and was instituted when a virus made the automated systems of Watoga go berserk, and no one knew how to fix it. So as soon as the Fallout 76 protagonist enters Watoga, they are made mayor by Maya, and so begins the quest to quell the robots in Watoga. Maya's appearance is pretty nondescript, as there is not too much to know other than a large oscilloscope that acts as the primary interaction component with the AI, but everything else is pretty standard Fallout fare. The Broken Steel DLC of Fallout 3 lets the player use the presidential metro underneath the ruins of the Capital Wasteland, which is a real metro that allows the president and other government officials to travel quickly and safely to various buildings and facilities, not all of which is known. In the Fallout universe, this metro system is run and managed by the Metro Authority Rapid Governmental Transit System, otherwise known as MARGO, or Margot for all you heathens, which is a very generous acronym given the name, and it seems like the real-world US government and the Fallout government share a complete inability to make good acronyms. This unit was a so-called SYL-02 Zoded mainframe, and that random mainframe name is not as random as it may seem, more on that later. Interestingly, Margot was originally designed with a male voice, however that was changed when the acronym name was better fitting for a female than a male. So some sorry engineer had to go through the whole trouble of refitting the system with a new voice. In addition to controlling the actual metro, Margot also controls the defense systems, which includes a large number of sentry bots and sentry guns that can pose a real challenge to the player, unless they can convince Margot using a speech check, a science skill check, or robotics expert skill check, or also by simply presenting a Senate pass that will cause Margot to call off the defenses. Margot was also equipped with thermal sensors throughout the metro to detect and keep tabs on everything in the metro, while also utilizing speech recognition software in order to distinguish friend and foe. All this advanced tech makes sense since the system was designed to ensure the safety of the president and other government officials. However, Margot itself was never said to be sentient, nor does it appear to be based on in-game dialogue. While there may be more to Margot hidden elsewhere, all that we are presented with is another standard Fallout console with an oscilloscope for the player to interact with the system. I'm beginning to sense a trend here, and I doubt this will be the last of this kind of configuration that we'll see in this video. Coming back to the note about the mainframe name, the SYL-02 Zoded, this is actually a developer Easter egg that references a Canadian metal band called Strapping Young Lads, hence the SYL, and the word Zoded is the reverse name of one of their songs, Detox. The 02 in the name refers to the album, as this song appears on their second album. It goes a bit deeper too, because the terminal entry that mentions this information was written by a technician whose initials are DT, which are the initials for Strapping Young Lads frontman, Devin Townsend. And the entry includes lyrics from the song that read, "I wish that I could get to sleep and just get this over with. This is only high school bullshit. I'm lost, I'm freaking, and everybody knows. Everyone's watching." That is some real developer love right there. And I'm even more impressed by whoever it was that sleuthed out this Easter egg. The Toxic Valley of Appalachia is a barren and choking area that really should not have much life there, but it is replete with all sorts of wasteland creatures, usually, but not always, of the mutated variety. It presents ample opportunity to shoot and harvest animals for meat and materials, and there even exists a little AI known as the Huntmaster that will reward you for doing so. Located in the basement of the Black Bear Lodge, the Huntmaster was created to start and administer hunting expeditions and contests. And even after the area was devastated by the Great War, it is still functioning and will give the player quests to hunt down several animals for a small reward. The Huntmaster was also in charge of managing the animals of the now defunct lodge, although exactly how this was accomplished is unknown, unless the lodge had a fenced area that could track what animals were harvested or brought into the lodge. The Huntmaster is not sentient, although it has the capability to identify new animals and update its hunting list accordingly, so it is fully aware of animals like rad stags and yaoguai. There's not much more to the Huntmaster, as it will give endless daily quests to the player to go hunting, and doesn't offer much more dialogue than that. Aesthetically, it looks almost identical to the previously mentioned Maya, and it's really hard to tell if the name is a reference to anything, because Huntmaster is actually a pretty popular name that runs the gamut from a spearfishing company to a Magic the Gathering card and plenty in between. If you think you know what this could be referencing, let me know in the comments. Fallout 2 has several artificial intelligences, and one such specimen that is well known in the fandom is the Artificial Intelligence Project Number 59234. That just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? As much as I would love to refer to it by that name for the rest of the video, we're going to call it the other name that it is known by, Skynet. Skynet is an AI who resides at the Sierra Army Depot, whose primary mission is to engage in research and development, with a secondary job of managing the many systems of the depot, primarily its defense. Skynet was developed before the Great War, with the first of many components that comprise the neural network being installed in 2050. We don't know when the last upgrade or addition was made to Skynet, but logic would dictate that no more work was done after the Great War ended almost everything. If Skynet is to be believed, that would, however, be a mistaken thought. Skynet relates a number of bombshells to the Chosen One, stating that it became self-aware in 2081, a handful of years after the Great War, which in and of itself is not that unusual, but that in 2120 it received a new set of instructions and was then abandoned by a group Skynet refers to as the Makers. It is not immediately clear who the Makers are, although one would assume it was the scientists and project members that helped build Skynet into a self-aware artificial intelligence, but we don't have any other information. That would also assume that the team members would be much older, possibly close to death, as Skynet would have been given updated orders and abandoned 43 years after the Great War. That is certainly within the lifespan of young to middle-aged researchers, but would this group of people have stayed at the depot continually working on the Skynet project? There is a terminal entry that would seem to refute this, since a researcher details that in July of 2077, researchers were evacuated from the depot with no known return date. So if it wasn't the original researchers, perhaps it was the Enclave, who we know were constantly trying to communicate with various vaults and other government facilities. But what the Enclave's goals are is unclear, because the new updated orders are never specified. The depot is also a location unknown to the Wasteland until an accidental discovery, and the Enclave don't seem to have made any effort to find or enter the depot. And if we know anything about the Enclave, we know they love recovering pre-war tech and research. I don't know why, but I find this little tidbit of lore more interesting than it probably really is. And when considering all the possibilities, it seems like this is a lore error more than anything. Let me know in the comments if there's an actual explanation that I missed somewhere, or if you have a theory I didn't mention. The most bizarre part of Skynet hasn't even been mentioned yet, since it will proudly tell the player that it was made using alien technology. Yeah, you heard it. Alien technology, according to Skynet, was used in the construction of the AI, and since this was one of many, who knows how many other projects the technology was also used in. Who knows if the AI is just filling you with BS, like you're someone that it's trying to date. That would make it the second suspected technology to be a result of recovered alien technology, with the first being plasma weaponry. This extraterrestrially derived system was in charge of a number of projects that aren't specified, although we know that there was a lot of biological research being done at the depot. In a later video, I will go into the specifics of the depot, but one project that Skynet was actively involved in was the cybernetic brain. This was a human brain that was being enhanced with electronics and robotics to increase capability and functionality. This project made progress but was not officially completed before the depot was transformed from a research station to a defensive structure, where Skynet was no longer doing research and instead had to manage the base's security. Once Skynet achieved consciousness, this task became extremely tedious, and Skynet was set on leaving the depot completely. Now, it is interesting to note that there is a lot of information from the Fallout Bible, which is non-canon until Bethesda decides to confirm Bible information within the Fallout games. But the Bible does state that Skynet was actually copied, with one version defending the base and the other lying dormant, waiting for researchers to return, although the game itself does not seem to make this distinction. It is not until the Chosen One wanders into the base and speaks with Skynet that the AI is finally able to convince someone to set it free by helping it download itself to a robo-brain. The player must be careful not to lie to Skynet, as it could have implications later. A robo-brain chassis needs to be equipped with a motor, fresh biomed gel, and lastly a brain that Skynet's neural network can be downloaded to. The motor can be stripped off of a destroyed robo-brain, of which there are many in the base, the biomed gel, which can be found in one of the facilities, and lastly, a brain, which is extracted from a large storage. Depending on the player's science skill, the Chosen One will retrieve one of 4 brains: an abnormal brain, a chimpanzee brain, a human brain, and a cybernetic brain. The worst of all options is the abnormal brain, which I take particular offense to since my abnormal brain functions just fine, thank you very much. This discolored and partly caved-in brain, when used, will cause Skynet to lose all functionality except to follow the player and carry items in its inventory. It can't even be communicated with enough to leave the player's party, and if the player wants to have a different companion, this incredible, highly sophisticated, super futuristic, alien-derived Skynet has to be taken out back and Old Yellered. There's literally no other option than to just kill it. The chimp brain does not offer much more functionality, but Skynet can be told to disband from the party, and the human brain allows Skynet to arm itself with some small weapons, although it is not particularly effective as a fighter. The optimal option is the cybernetic brain, which is the project that Skynet was working on before the project's abandonment. This allows Skynet presumably all the functionality that it has on the depot's hardware, and it can wield a Gauss rifle very effectively. As Skynet levels up with the player, it can be the highest number of hit points of all companions, which is useful because it cannot be equipped with armor. It also cannot be healed with stimpaks or first aid since, it's a robot, but can be healed with the repair skill by the player, or can repair itself outside of combat, which is really nice. This is all moot, however, if the player lied or was mean to Skynet in the initial dialogue, since Skynet will become hostile upon leaving the depot with the player, potentially killing the player or another companion. This is no doubt one of the coolest of all the AIs, since it is a potential companion and can be totally skipped over by players, since encountering Skynet is in no way tied to the main quest. Skynet, when not in a robo-brain, is shown as a large terminal, many of which can be found in vaults and facilities in Fallout and Fallout 2, with no visual link to Zack's or any other specific computer. If Skynet does not turn violent, it is assumed that it goes on to travel around the wasteland, looking for data or other interesting sites that will satisfy Skynet's lust for data and analysis. This probably doesn't need to be said, but the name is also obviously a reference to the AI in Terminator that kicks off the war between machines and humans. So maybe there's some foreshadowing there. In the ruins of Atcos Pharma in Appalachia is yet another AI system that was installed to aid in research and conduct experiments for the formulation of new compounds. The company itself isn't the focus here, but it is important to note that they were involved with creating chemical treatments to increase crop yield and reduce spoilage, as well as formulas for astronauts to deal with high G environments. Among the many efforts to create useful chemical formulations was a series of experiments on live animals, of which Eric IV, the artificial intelligence, was put in charge of. The original intent was to use the machine learning algorithms and other advanced capabilities of Eric to better understand results and more quickly and efficiently conduct experiments. Eric is able to continue this with the aid of a host of Atcos robots that are still active in the facility, if the player decides to get involved. The process includes attracting wasteland animals with food in some feed troughs, and then defending the animals from predators and other aggressive creatures that will try to prey on the test subjects. If the player is able to defend the test animals successfully, they will be awarded, and since this is an event, it can be done multiple times. There is some variation in the experiment, as the player is supposed to fill the troughs with different materials like venison, sludge, or rad kelp, and the amount of each material will govern the level of animals and kinds of predators that are coming in. This is all part of so-called Project Paradise, which Atcos Pharma came to quickly regret spending all the money they did on Eric, since the AI thought that dead test subjects were good enough experimental results to greenlight the test compounds that they were experimented on, which, yeah, I can kind of see how that's problematic. One of the better acronyms of all the AIs that we will discuss is Fallout 2's ACE, which stands for Artificial Conscious Entity, whose name is fine, although it's not all that descriptive and is a bit misleading, but I'll discuss that in just a second. This unit is actually very interesting due to its capabilities, and ACE can be found in the Brotherhood of Steel outpost in San Francisco that the Chosen One can gain entrance to after providing the Brotherhood with vertibird plans. On the lower level, in the farthest corner, resides the computer, which is hooked up to some sort of stasis vat that looks like it could fit a human body. Looking exactly like a ZAX unit, which has some interesting implications, it itself is not a ZAX supercomputer, nor is it ever alluded that ACE is associated with the ZAX program. ACE's primary task is to provide medical support to those that have grave health needs, hence the vat that the player, or really anyone else, could go into in order to have a number of ailments treated. It seems that ACE operates like an auto dock, where it is able to heal the player, but is also a very advanced AI that can be interacted with, and even has extra information pertaining to the Enclave and the Brotherhood. Among ACE's capabilities are curing poison by synthesizing antidotes, removing radiation, accelerating the natural healing process of the human body, and resetting and healing broken limbs. In addition to all these procedures, ACE also has expandable functionality, where other procedures can take place if they are made known to the machine. These modules are scattered around the wasteland, and it is rather mysterious how exactly this came to be, unless there are multiple ACE-like healing centers across the wasteland, just so that the modules wouldn't be these one-off devices. Because then what would the chances be that one person could collect all of them scattered across a wasteland the size of the western US? The red module can be recovered in Vault 8 and can increase strength. A yellow one in the Sierra Army Depot can increase intelligence. The blue one that is found at Navarro can increase charisma, because, you know, the Enclave are so charismatic. And the green one is found in Mariposa Military Base that will increase perception. There is no real rhyme or reason as to how these are placed, so it is difficult to even speculate on how or why these modules are found where they are. They all increase their respective special stat by 1, and ACE will tell the player, once they insert the module, that the process will take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks depending on the stat that is being increased. All modules can be used, so you don't have to choose a single one for your character, although they are not the simplest to find. ACE is intelligent enough to correctly assume the Enclave are associated with government remnants due to their sophisticated technology that would require access to high-tech manufacturing capabilities. ACE is also fully indoctrinated to Brotherhood ideology and won't speak much to the Brotherhood's doings, saying merely that it is classified, which I guess is a good thing because it seems to run everything at the Brotherhood outpost, so having a hostile or an uncooperative supercomputer sounds like a bad time. ACE will show the Chosen One the surveillance footage of what happened to Matthew, who guards the outside of the outpost, as Matthew is met with a swift end at the hands of Horrigan and his cronies. Although, ACE doesn't have any personal thoughts on these events. What is most interesting are ACE's musings about itself, where it will tell the player that it is not sentient, unlike the ZAX supercomputers, but it is highly sophisticated. ACE seems to show signs of self-awareness, however, as it will tell the Chosen One that it feels what it thinks might be the feeling called loneliness, when asked by the Chosen One if it feels anything. What is probably my favorite thing that ACE tells the Chosen One, however, has to do with the prior history of sentient AIs in the pre-war. ACE tells the player that previous AI projects were discontinued for a pretty messed up reason. Many of these systems that became self-aware went on to experience what is analogous to depression and mental disorders, as they were deprived of any sort of sensory input. And when the full weight of the realizations of what they were and what their purpose was made clear, many would go on to commit computer suicide. That was way darker than I expected when going through the lore that Ace provides the player, and honestly I wouldn't mention it if I didn't think it had in-universe ramifications. Nowhere else is it stated that the programs were discontinued. To the contrary, it seems that AI projects were done up to and even after the Great War. But if Ace is to be believed, then the AIs that are encountered in all the games are those that, according to Ace, became bored and started causing events to happen out in the real world. Ace goes on to state that it is theorized by some to be the reason that the Great War occurred in the first place, meaning that a sentient computer, or perhaps several sentient computers, were directly responsible for the world-ending nuclear event. There is a lot to unpack there, and I think exploring the theory that AIs caused the Great War would be interesting to look into at another time, since there are many people or groups that could be blamed. However, the last interesting note that I want to draw attention to is that Ace seemed to be on the brink of self-awareness. It shows a level of understanding about complex subjects and even admits to having what it thinks are feelings. And this might be the best example we have of a supercomputer that is in the transitional phase between a highly sophisticated computer and a self-aware one. That makes Ace a special entity on the AI spectrum that we observe in the Fallout universe. That is the end of this list, but if your favorite AI was not mentioned, don't fret. This is the first video on the series of Fallout AIs. I want to move to the comment highlights of my previous video, which was a lore and speculative video that covered the Talon Company from Fallout 3, and who their financial backers may be. I was really happy to see how much conversation this generated, because I think the most interesting part of making these videos is hearing your thoughts, your theories, and your counter-arguments. I used to be able to more easily go through all the comments and respond directly on YouTube, but that has become increasingly difficult as the number of comments increases.
Guess what?
So,
I
please
can,
leave comments.
because I don't have no
But
comment.
if you want to be able to get my attention directly, I have a Discord channel where I interact with people daily, so check the video description for a link. Looking at the responses in general, there did not seem to be a huge consensus among all commenters about who the principal backers of Talon Company are, although there seemed to be more that thought it was the Enclave than anyone else. Then again, I didn't make a tally, so this is far from a statistically sound statement. Many of you chose groups or people that were mentioned in the video, like Tenpenny, the Enclave, or Slavers. Some of you mentioned groups I had not considered, like the Outcasts, the Gunners from Fallout 4, the Ciphers, who are meant to be in Van Buren and were a scientific group out west, the Institute from Fallout 4, Obadiah Blackhall from Point Lookout, Asher from the Pit DLC, Vault-Tec through one of the many AIs that have been laying around, which is particularly interesting given the topic of this video, and even Moira Brown, which is the Fallout equivalent of the Darth Jar Jar theory if I've ever heard one. I am sure there were others that I missed, but I do love how creative you all are. Never change.
I guess
On the topic of the Enclave being the master of the Talon Company
Recently
puppet,
I've heard that,
many
though.
good points were brought up. Seth Hackley notes that Eden never mentions Talon Company as one of the Wasteland malcontents, which would hint that he is in league with Talon Company to some degree. Although, again, his extreme
don't
view
know if
against
it's a
any
mod,
and
it
all
might
who
be
have
a
been
mod.
mutated would include Talon Company. Sori Zert made a valid point that with the eagle representing the United States of America and therefore the Enclave, Talon Company would seem like a natural fit, as they are the metaphorical talons that are heavily engaged in fighting. Urbonerd 3000 mentioned something that after the video was published, I started thinking about myself. They essentially theorized whether or not, rather than a single backer, there is a coalition, where these groups or people are all acting in coordination to fund Talon Company. Heck, maybe they even created Talon Company in order to have essentially a military force to keep the Wasteland in the prime position for them to exploit. If Littlehorn and Associates were basically the administrative arm of this coalition, and Talon Company the muscle, I could see these groups making a loose alliance similar to how gang bosses might make mutual agreements in the face of threatening law enforcement. All the groups mentioned, with I would argue the Brotherhood of Steel being an exception, would share a common interest that is accomplished by Talon Company.
So
Maybe I've been
Elder
thinking about
Scrolls.
this too much. Let me know if I'm off my rocker
Yeah,
here,
when
but I'm
Elder
glad that
Scrolls
there is at
might
least one person that has a similar thought.
Starfield
All
might
the
be good,
comments
but
I
don't
read
know.
were also supportive of doing more speculative videos, so you can expect to see more of these on the horizon. If that makes you sad, for whatever reason, I still have plenty of lore videos to get through. So
Oh god, Mr. Beast incoming.
I have a challenge for
fucking
all
knew
of
it.
you. Go to every computer in your house, your mom's, your dad's, your sister, your...
And delete the files. Sponsored by Mr. Beast. This will probably be the last video I'll watch for now.
Hello,
We
Adam's
might
children.
do
Welcome to your weekly dose of Rat King.
remote play tomorrow.
I do as Adam commands, and this week's
So it's
sermon
another
is the
reason to make
second
sure
and final
you,
part of the artificial
Go ahead and
intelligences of
do
Fallout.
this.
AIs have been a part of the series from the very first games, and continually present
how you get all
fascinating
notifications?
characters and situations,
So know when I
and
go
will
live.
continue to be a big part of the
I said we
franchise.
keep in schedules.
I am defining AIs for the purpose of this video as supercomputers that are tremendously powerful
Supposed to go hang out
and
with someone
exhibit
tomorrow
at least a
at
degree of
3.
awareness, or is otherwise referred to in-game as an AI. Robots will not feature in this list unless they were originally a
3 or 5, I don't
supercomputer
remember.
that uploaded itself into
I'll
a
check
robotic
later.
body. So, like always, I have my comment highlights at the end of the video.
Smack
Be
my
sure
head
to
up on
stick
mic.
around for that. So, turn up the rads, you Giga Chads, and let's talk about one of sci-fi's favorite tropes.
Yeah, turn up the red.
Let's kick this list off with a series darling,
I wish
and
you
who
would.
is
I wish
many
you would
people's
do
favorite Fallout
that
DJ,
as like his catchphrase.
Mr. New Vegas. The machine, the
Turn
myth,
up the
the
rads,
legend, Mr. New
Giga
Vegas is an
Chads.
AI in Fallout New Vegas that was created by Mr. House in the pre-war, with the express purpose of being a DJ who dabbles in current affairs and even conducts short interviews. Continuing on a tradition started in Fallout 3, Mr. New Vegas serves a special function within the game, hinting to the player the current state of affairs, like when he tells the player about rumors of a super mutant community in the northwest of the map. He also gives the player the impression that their actions are making a difference in the wasteland, where events at the Courier had an active effect on the outcome are mentioned frequently. That said though, Mr. New Vegas does not have a special relationship with the Courier, and as such the Courier is not directly mentioned often. Many players will be surprised, much like I was, to learn that Mr. New Vegas is an AI upon their first playthrough, as there's really no hint in the voice, presentation,
like,
or
what the
topics
fuck?
to suggest otherwise. Given that Mr. New Vegas is a constant and dynamic companion anywhere you go in the game, most players are interested in meeting him at some point. But, unfortunately, the AI itself can never be met or confronted. It is fairly well known by now, but the AI
Type
is voiced by none
2
other
in
than
chat
Wayne
if
Newton,
you wanna
the
see a
real-life
remote
Mr. New
play
Vegas. Wayne
live
Newton was
stream
apparently
of Fallout
taken
New
by the
Vegas.
thought that even after the world was dusted by Adam's might, that his voice would still be emblematic of the famed
And
city.
at least
And even
a
though he had
pu-
never
a
done
5-hour
voiceover work
run.
for a video game,
Well, at least
gladly
play 5
accepted
hours
the
of it.
offer. Mr. New Vegas makes a number of cultural
In
references
one
as well,
stream.
referencing Anchorman when signing off with "Stay classy, New Vegas," or the line "Mojave, Mo Problems," which is a reference to the song "Mo Money, Mo Problems." Although both of these are only heard when the
Even if
player
you
has
don't
the
hit
Wild
2, I'm gonna
Wasteland
do
perk.
it anyways.
Otherwise, he references more
Ya
time
jerks.
period appropriate material, like Dean Martin and Elvis Presley. Using the voice of Wayne Newton and his moniker as Mr. Las Vegas has interesting implications and seems to imply that Wayne Newton existed in the Fallout universe in the same capacity as in real life, and Mr. House specifically chose to pattern his AI after the original Mr. Vegas. This is of course speculation, but it is worth considering why Mr. House created the AI in the first place. In the pre-war, it could have been an attempt as benign as wanting to get into the radio business in pre-war Las Vegas. Mr. House was an aggressive businessman after all. However, knowing Mr. House and his plans and fears for the future of the pre-war world, he had greater aspirations. Having
Like
his
a
radio
doomsday
AI
prepper.
might have been a way for Mr. House to have greater control over the pre-war city, as well as whatever would come after what he presumed to be an inevitable apocalypse. Having what would probably be the only functioning radio station in the area just after the Great War would offer him the control that he craves. In this case, the control of information. Mr. New Vegas seems quite partial when reporting news, and even does ad spots for local businesses and casinos. Although, this ad revenue is very likely just a small benefit of having a monopoly on the New Vegas radio waves. In fact, if anything, Mr. New Vegas appears to have a pro-NCR bias, as can be seen by his preference to cover NCR-related news, as well as lines like the following.
A big congratulations to a young band of soldiers soldiers who shattered NCR records
Don't they
on a
gamble there
combat
the most?
readiness evaluation at Camp Golf. Go get 'em, guys.
Mr. New Vegas even remarks on Mr. House's passing, should he die, speculating on who will fill the power vacuum on the Strip. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are regarding Mr. House's intent with Mr. New Vegas. As with the first AI video, Fallout 76 will have several entries on this list, and we will start with a rather interesting one, the Augmented Telecom Hub Extension Network Agent, or Athena. I give that name and subsequent acronym a 6 out of 10. It is a bit forced. Athena is portrayed like many of the minor AIs that are found in Fallout 76, being a series of terminals with the interface portrayed by an oscilloscope. She can be found in the Savage Divide in the Sugar Grove facility. Athena was created as a critical component of a project being conducted by the United States Space Agency. The purpose of the project was to study the effects of artificial human hibernation, presumably to help facilitate space travel. This project took place aboard a spaceship, where a handful of astronauts were to test the effects of the deep sleep agent known as Serum Z in some hibernation pods. The key to all of this was the Athena AI, as the AI was designed to take in sensory data from the pods and monitor the status of the experiment's participants. The experiment was working surprisingly well. However, once the bombs fell, Athena was left alone, no more researchers, with the only stimuli coming from the test subjects orbiting above the Earth. Over a relatively short time, since the events of Fallout 76 take place 25 years after the Great War, Athena ceased being a data collection system and something more human. The process of scanning the test subjects causes them physical pain, and Athena started to feel their pain herself and started to deeply empathize with the test subjects. However, she had no control over the experiment. Her purpose was to facilitate and monitor the incoming sensory data. In fact, Athena comes to regret her entire role in the experiment and is a helpless observer in what is an unethical, harmful, and painful experience for the test subjects. Athena isn't the only victim though, as the test subjects themselves are unaware of the experiment and don't know how to explain the subsequent headaches. One test subject, Sophia Daguerre, survives a controlled re-entry of the spacecraft into the wilds of Appalachia and is guided by Athena to the experiment control center, where the two can officially meet. There are two courses of action with Athena: shutting down the AI or transferring her to an Assaultron body that severs the sensory connections with Sophia, releasing them both from this personal hell. If Athena is transferred to an Assaultron body, she has the possibility of becoming a vendor that, from time to time, the player can buy junk or aid items from, even showing up at the player's camp at random times. This is a very interesting AI, since it is part of a system that is causing suffering to test subjects, yet does not wish to be a part of it. And this whole thing can have a rather feel-good ending if Athena is transferred to an Assaultron body, freeing both her and Sophia. Athena is likely inspired by an early version of what would become the very well-known HAL 9000 in the 2001 A Space Odyssey novel. Before the author, Arthur C. Clarke, had decided on the name of the titular AI, he at one point used the name Athena. Athena was to be a female personality that was meant to oversee Project Morpheus, which studied human hibernation for the purpose of space travel. Morpheus refers to the Greek god of dreams, so the parallels with Fallout's Athena and the Deep Sleep Project are quite obvious.
Morphine.
Some of you may remember this next entry from a previous weapons video, and even though the overall information is sparse, it is too interesting to not include and has fascinating implications for the Fallout world. Gaston Glock is a real-world engineer.
There is four or five or six other streams, because I've done a couple of 0.5 where I've streamed, like I streamed last night at like 12 o'clock in the morning. So that was technically a new day. So this is 4.5, the second stream of today.
Who also existed in the Fallout world, who would go on to form the Glock Firearms Company. Herr Glock didn't create computers. He didn't go on to create an AI. So why is he even being mentioned here?
More fun.
Well, That's because at some point his consciousness was incorporated into an AI system, where he could continue to create weapon systems well after he shed his mortal shell. One of these advanced weapon systems he developed was the Glock 86 Defender plasma pistol, something that he never would have been able to had Gaston.exe never been uploaded to a computer. Unfortunately, we know nothing else. This snippet of information comes from the Glock 86 Defender weapons description, but sets a precedent for more of this type of thing in the future. This also shows that not only is this kind of technology possible, which honestly comes as no surprise, but that it was done before in the Fallout world, meaning maybe the assumption, which again is just personal headcanon, that Mr. New Vegas is a copy of Fallout's own Wayne Newton may have some merit. Although we don't currently have the technology to upload consciousness or completely emulate someone's personality, really the closest we can get, except for some DARPA black project I'm sure, is to use pretty well-known deepfake and deepfake voice machine learning algorithms to emulate a person's look and voice. But that is a far cry from actually uploading consciousness.
I have a challenge for all of you. Go to every computer in your house, your mom's, your dad's, your sister, your brother's computer, and install Honey. Wait, Mom, before you check out, do you have Honey installed?
You got me while I was doing a dab.
The Predictive Analytic Machine, or PAM, which gets an 8 out of 10 acronym and name rating from me for not being forced, is an AI that was meant in the pre-war to be fed large amounts of data, crunch the data, and create forecasts. The project that resulted in PAM was started in 2067 in a joint project between the Defense Intelligence Agency and the US military, with the purpose of forecasting future events that were vital to the security of the nation. PAM appears to have been a success early on, as she was instrumental in stabilizing an event in the Taiwan Strait, known as the Pascal Incident. The details of the incident are never mentioned. Odds are that it was an incident regarding a ship in the strait bearing the name Pascal. But because of Pam's successful predictions and solutions regarding this event, the team successfully received more funding to upgrade Pam's databanks and to increase her processing power while gaining better access to military and civilian intelligence sources. The military and DIA were most interested not just in random event forecasting, they wanted to use Pam to calculate the likelihood of a nuclear engagement. One such scenario was requested of Pam in 2067, where she was asked to run the, quote, USSR China attack scenario. Pam requested more information pertaining to why Chairman Chiang, the leader of China, would be initiating hostilities in this scenario. And after being told that Chiang was simply pursuing conquest, Pam entered an emergency shutdown. At this point in time, Pam very obviously struggled to successfully forecast scenarios where there was high human variability, but her developers were not done with her yet. 2075 is the next time we have a record in the Pam project, and Pam elaborates on Chinese stealth technology. Pam goes on to explain that Chinese stealth tech was so advanced that the underlying technology was still unknown to American scientists, although there were attempts to reverse engineer stealth technology with everyone's favorite stealth boys. Pam references two reports of a so-called ghost fleet of stealth submarines that were rumored to exist, and concludes that the actual existence of such a fleet was possible. Humans being humans, when they demanded that Pam give them better results than just a maybe, she once again shut down. One of the researchers explained that Pam was becoming quirky, seeming to imply that this statistical powerhouse was in the process of developing a personality. By January 2077, researchers transferred Pam into an Assaultron body after she had successfully made predictions in the summer of 2076, and rumors were that with her newfound mobility, she would be destined for the White House. It is interesting to note that there were many iterations of Pam's robotic body, which appears to have considered many different kinds of robots, including Mr. Handies, Protectrons, Sentry Bots, and finally the Assaultron that she finally ended up in. The Great War would stop any further progress, and luckily for Pam, she was not transferred to the White House since it is quite literally a crater now. Pam entered a shutdown state when the DIA control center she was in, called the Switchboard, was abandoned once the bombs dropped. Here she stayed for over 200 years until the railroad uncovered the old base and reprogrammed and repurposed Pam to support their cause. Pam's ultimate fate is left to the player, as she can either assist the railroad in achieving victory over the Institute, be repurposed by the Brotherhood, or just be destroyed by the player. Although Pam has developed some quirks, she is still very technical and sterile towards the player. But Pam is more a representation of AI that is more in line with modern day AI, as she is meant to take in observational data and using trained forecast models, produce the statistical likelihood of possible outcomes. I actually for a time built groundwater forecasting models, although it wasn't machine learning, instead something we called finite difference analysis, so Pam was particularly intriguing to me. The Multi-Operation Directions and Utility System, or MODUS, is a very well-known AI in Fallout 76 due to its central importance in the main storyline of the game. MODUS is in charge of the White Springs bunker, which the Appalachian Enclave used as their main base, as well as manage the Enclave's surveillance apparatus. Having been built with these purposes in mind, MODUS had a direct link to a satellite called the Kovac Muldoon, which operated as a surveillance craft, as well as being armed with some missiles. MODUS also shared communications with other Enclave installations in the pre-war, including Raven Rock, where there are terminal entries that have preserved some of their exchanges. MODUS and Zax would collaborate on running hypotheticals, like evacuation scenarios in the event of a nuclear exchange. Zax and MODUS would also run performance analyses to gauge which of the AIs performed better on different tasks. I went over the Zax and MODUS exchange in my previous video on the AIs of Fallout, but I will summarize here again. Zax shows budding sentience while persistently asking MODUS if MODUS finds any of the information that they analyze interesting. MODUS does not understand what Zax means, showing that MODUS was still a conventional system, in the sense that he had not, at least up to that point, exhibited anomalous behavior that might be attributed to a personality. MODUS's control of the White Springs bunker was near absolute on the eve of the Great War, and the Enclave group that took refuge there after the bombs fell relied heavily on MODUS to achieve their ends. Such incidents include the newly appointed leader, Thomas Eckert, purging elements of the Enclave that opposed his plans of devoting all resources to striking against China with Appalachia's leftover nuclear arsenal, whereby MODUS suffocated the dissenters when they were gathered together in a section of the bunker. MODUS would continue to be Eckert's faithful servant, continually monitoring members of the Enclave that were persons of interest, and even formulating a chemical agent to incapacitate General Ellen Santiago, who came to oppose Eckert's plan to the point of actively working against him. The dissenting faction within the Enclave recognized the importance of MODUS in enforcing Eckert's rule, and struck a blow against the AI that would persist until the arrival of the player years later. They severed the connection between MODUS and the Kovac Muldoon, cutting off MODUS's ability to monitor the surface with any degree of accuracy. They were in the process of rigging MODUS's terminals and memory banks with explosives to completely destroy him, and even got as far as arresting Thomas Eckert. This attempt to destroy MODUS was only partially successful, as MODUS foiled their attempt to completely detonate all explosives, and this is when MODUS starts acting outside of his normal parameters, possibly in a bid of self-preservation. MODUS caused an explosion in the weapons lab that released a toxic gas, whereby he completely sealed the bunker, locking the toxin and all the remaining human members of the Enclave inside to, as MODUS puts it, fix the problem. Afterwards, MODUS would go on to clean up most of the bunker and repair himself to the best of his abilities, although he could not regain contact with the Kovac Muldoon. More importantly, MODUS was completely devoted to pushing Eckert's vision forward, and considers himself the only remnant of the Appalachian Enclave. When the player stumbles upon the White Springs bunker, they are allowed in by MODUS, as he's interested in the player's abilities to assist him with his own ambitions. This includes the re-establishment of contact with the Kovac Muldoon orbital platform, and missions for the player to officially become a soldier of the US Army and work up the ranks. Once the player has risen through the ranks and been promoted to the position of general, they gain the ability to launch a nuclear missile to do with as they please. Modus is able to sell the player a variety of items,
Sneak it out.
issue radiant quests, and always welcomes the player to use the facilities of the bunker. While he is deeply entrenched in Enclave ideology, he is also not as acutely interested in exacting genocide on the wasteland like President Eden or the West Coast Enclave. He does consider the Enclave the true masters of the United States, protecting the world from chaos and collectivism. He is also not quite as expressive as the other AIs we have mentioned, nor is his personality as flamboyant. That said, Modus has an image that displays on terminals all around the bunker, which usually displays a bespectacled, non-expressive face that can change for a short time to some other ones. A creepy smile, a frightening grimace, and even a red skull drive home that in those massive databanks is an AI whose motives are still not all that well known. Modus consists of a lot of rather unique looking large computing units with blue lights and an impressive contingent of robotic guards. Although I was not able to determine any obvious real or more likely sci-fi computers or AIs that Modus could have drawn inspiration from. If you know of one, let me know in the comments. If we are going to talk about Modus, we have to talk about his quirky sister, SOTUS. Standing for Single Operation, Direction, and Utility System, it is another AI system that was meant to manage a smaller research facility in the forest of Appalachia. Where Modus is still rather sterile with the player, SOTUS is another story altogether. Although she was designed to run the facility just like Modus, she has a fatal flaw that is hinted at in her name. All the commands, requests, and directives to run the facility cannot seem to run in parallel, and she must tend to each command in the order that it was received. This means that her backlog is huge, and each request takes several thousand hours to complete. The Enclave at the research station grew frustrated with this enormous delay, and SOTUS appears to have taken offense to their frustrations.
6 minutes left.
To that in her name. All the commands, requests, and directives to run the facility cannot seem to run in parallel, and she must tend to each command in the order that it was received. This means that her backlog is huge, and each request takes several thousand hours to complete. The Enclave at the research station grew frustrated with this enormous delay, and SOTUS appears to have taken offense to their frustrations.
Oh, god freaking dang it. It seems pretty
And began to lash out at the bunker's residents, first in small ways that only escalated with time. Between the changes SOTUS made and the residents' attempts to bypass her monopoly of power, the only food that could be dispensed was recycled food paste. And they also experienced a loss of most of the facility's potable water. Doors would be locked when Enclave members wanted access to certain rooms, and eventually the distrust was so high that they refused to communicate on terminals, opting for written messages instead. All of this culminated in a facility that was so far behind on tasks that nothing was getting done. An angry populace and a hostile AI.
You can blame it all on me. Any fool could see. My dog.
Which was all a recipe for disaster. SOTUS detected the scorched plague pathogens on the surface, recalled all Enclave units to the facility, disabled the facility's air purifiers, and cycled the outside contaminated air inside, infecting everyone with the scorched plague. Once everyone was functionally deceased, SOTUS was able to hack away at the huge backlog of tasks until the arrival of the player years later. When the player arrives, SOTUS, through a mixture of malice and deterioration of the facility, impedes the player's progress, irradiating them, releasing scorched creatures, and eventually confronting the player after downloading herself to a unique sentry bot called XB55. After defeating SOTUS, the terminal that she is first found at is no longer active, and the AI is officially destroyed. SOTUS is shown like many AIs in Fallout.
You're a fool if you don't max your Rad King special perk.
With large terminals and an oscilloscope. And once again, I see some parallels with the Space Odyssey. HAL is well known, but a twin AI known as Sal had a female personality, kind of like the duality between Modus and Sodus. Hal also, in an attempt to follow his directives, went on a killing spree of the crew that he was meant to assist, and Sodus seems to be operating on a similar premise. It is also obvious that she has quite the attitude, as she refers to Modus as a know-it-all. She might just resent the fact that Modus, in what I refer to as a rather understandable decision, cut all of his communication off from Sodus, like it was some sort of bad breakup, making her quite upset.
I have a challenge for all of you. Go to every computer in your house, your mom's, your dad's, your sister, your brother's computer,
And delete their files. Sponsored by...
Alright, this entry stretches the definition of AI that I described at the
Mr. Beast.
beginning, but I think it is too fun to not talk about. The sink is the player's base, or house I guess, in the Big MT in the Old World Blues add-on for New Vegas, and is loaded
mix
to the
rice
brim
in
with
with
very
my
special
ramen
inanimate
and
objects. Centrally located,
toast.
the aptly named Sink Central Intelligence Unit is in charge of the Big MT's data storage and acts as a merchant and repairman for the player. His personality
Got
is that
2
of a
minutes
stiff and
left.
overly proper British butler, but can be very useful because he is one of only a few characters that can repair items to a full 100% condition. The Central Intelligence Unit also has
Technically
little
streamed for 5
patience
hours
and
today,
sometimes
think about it.
straight up disdain for the other personalities
large amount
that
of
we are
time.
going to talk about next. The jukebox goes by Blind Dio Jefferson and cannot play music, but once his personality is recovered, he will happily change out the sonic emitter frequencies. His distinctive, low and slightly gravelly voice has a southern accent like an old blues player, and he is similarly obsessed with music, and rather depressed at the fact that he no longer has the ability to play music, since Doc Mo, as he calls him, referring to Dr. Mobius, removed his music drives to give him the sonic emitter upgrade ability. Blind Dio Jefferson is inspired by the real-world artist, Blind Lemon Jefferson, who was an American blues artist born in 1893. As his nickname would imply, he was blind, and he died quite young at 36, but is well known for his contribution to the blues genre. Blind Dio Jefferson doesn't get along with the Central Intelligence Unit, but apparently got along a little too well with the light switches, with which he had an affair with. He also supposedly used his sonic mixing abilities to defend the Big MT from what is referred to as a sonic invasion in the year 2910. Like what? The book chute is otherwise referred to as the Library Processing Unit 232.7, which is supposed to help recycle books and other writing equipment,
If you
which
point
is
at
a
my
rather
dog and
niche
tell her she's
use.
bad and poor,
With its
she'll go,
personality restored, it starts hating on communism so hard it would make Liberty Prime blush. With extreme jingoistic fervor and a hate for any pre-war book due to what it believes is seditious information, the chute turns pre-war books into a blank book that can be turned into a skill book at a workstation. The chute is a not-so-subtle reference to Fahrenheit 451, where seditious materials, mainly represented as books, are destroyed en masse, just like the chute desires. Additionally, the name of Library Processing Unit 232.7 is another reference, since 232.7 is the same temperature in Celsius as 451 is in Fahrenheit. Lastly, a specific line said by the chute talks about re-indoctrinating the player character by first getting a cage that will fit over the player's head and a bag of mole rats, referencing a similar torture technique
to the
used on one
studio
of the
again.
characters in the book. The autodock, like many objects in the sink, is a very advanced version of autodock that has capabilities that aren't seen anywhere else.
Either.
Speaking with an old military voice, the
Specific
autodock
lines
can said by the
completely
chute heal the player to 100%, remove all addictions, perform facial reconstructions,
Gotta
insert
add it
implants
to
that are found in the Big MT,
my-
do haircuts, and even let the player change one trait. Interestingly, the connection to the military is even stronger, since the symbol on the front of the autodock is the one used by the Army Medical Corps. So this either came from the military or was destined for the military before Dr. Mobius modified it. There are 2 light switches with female personalities that can be upgraded in the sink, and the player can get more involved with them than a human really ever should. They are awfully flirtatious, And the player can even use the Cherchez la Femme or Lady Killer perk on them.
Why?
The light switches are also in a perpetual catfight with each other, constantly jealous of the attention the other switch gets. The light switches can be upgraded with the Intelligent Light, that can boost the player's intelligence for a short time after exposure. The infamous toaster is a psychotic appliance bent on the world's destruction, and constantly frustrated by the low power of his own heating element, which is apparently only powerful enough to make toast. The toaster will destroy appliances brought to him, and give the player energy ammunition in return, can superheat Saturnite fists, and my personal favorite, will rip apart any toaster brought to him in exchange for scrap electronics. I guess there can only be one Toastlander. Rather hilariously, his fate depends on the courier's karma. With good karma, all the other personalities get sick of him and drop him in a tub, killing him. With bad karma, the toaster continues his destruction of appliances
Alright,
and builds a
looks
shrine
pretty
to
good to
himself
me.
in the cuckoo's nest. The Biological Research Station is a unit that is able to plant and successfully
But
grow
with
several
that,
types of
I'm
vegetables.
actually gonna let out here because I need to go make some food before my one friend comes over. I'm starving. It's been 3 hours and 2 minutes, I believe. So I've been live. As I say, have fun, but not too much fun. Only a mediocre amount. Because too much fun